Holly and I are talking about.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It is April 17th in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. Our first item is our long-awaited housing inventory study. And since we have our commissioner up first, you are welcome to get in the witness chair.
Madam Chair, would you mind if Holly,
Okay, I was wondering
just
who.
to set the stage?
Okay, I wonder. I want someone to set the stage.
I have a slide that talks about what the spreadsheet is.
Okay.
How we went through.
Okay, and as either VHFA or DHCD get in the witness chair, to set it in the context of our overall annual housing goals that we need to start paying attention to, in order to meet the unmet need in the housing crisis. So if someone's prepared to do that, we can start with.
I'll leave an hour
Okay.
of an hour.
Great, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
If you all have it in the order you want, that's great. Okay, good morning.
And I put together some slides. So I feel
These are microscopic, so.
those are really microscopic and I think.
Oh, I'm so glad that even your young eyes have a challenge, because my old eyes are like, yeah.
Those are the kinds of spreadsheets that make young eyes old, so.
Well, I have the
Yeah.
spreadsheet. up in front of me.
really helpful.
But yes, but we have one
Yeah.
great spreadsheet.
Well, I think.
We need one in every committee. At least
It's an
one.
awesome responsibility.
Yes. I know I have those.
I can toggle back and forth. I have a slightly earlier version of the spreadsheet, but I can toggle back and forth between it and the slides, so you can see what we're talking about here. Depending on just being.
Invite me to the process.
Well, I don't know what else you do, really.
It's hard.
Paper
It would
doesn't
be
get
like 80 pages.
So just as this is starting for the record, Holly Major, the Director of Policy and Special Projects for Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
No. Oh, I have my monitor on. I was in the building if you just see it. That is okay. We're just getting text. Oh, yeah. Got way late in my community. I get it. A lot happening.
There we go. So you had asked us this year to repeat a spreadsheet that we did last year that pulls together what has been produced with the pandemic era spending on affordable housing.
And by the way, thank you for the monthly updates and
Yes.
including us in, we love numbers and we love to see progress and we really appreciate you that.
And I think what you do is you're getting them in a number of different formats. So
Yeah.
Maura and I can talk about what makes this one unique and special. And I think a conversation that we'd like to have with this committee is this information you're looking for moving forward? And how can we refine this project to make it readable and really useful
Yes.
to the committee's work? But essentially what this spreadsheet is in front of you is an inventory of affordable housing that's been produced or funded since 2020.
And are we talking about perpetually affordable housing and other forms of affordable housing?
We are. What we're talking about is, let me actually move over from this overview slide over to the spreadsheet itself, and I can walk you through what is there. Would that be helpful? Want to, that's the screen share.
Is the high school on housing?
Then I.
Yeah.
It's working on it.
Will be.
Wow.
Really good.
I wanna go see that.
Yeah, there's a lot to see in southern Vermont.
I know.
Yeah,
we
much
might
of it's
down.
It's a
We
lot to
spend a
see in
lot of
central
time in
Vermont
Central.
as well.
Okay, I'm just not. Thinking it up.
So what you're seeing here is a number of, is the housing programs that we're reporting on for this project. So it includes a reconciled list of VHCD and VHFA's projects
Okay.
because we co-fund so many.
Yeah.
And the thing that is really unique about this spreadsheet is it's showing you how the state investment in a percentage of the cost of affordable housing production is then leveraging the federal tax credits administered by DHFA. So that's what you're seeing here in yellow. These are the investments made by the state, typically 30 to 50% of a project, depending on the type of tax credit. More can go into more details there. And then that is bringing in the rest of the cost of housing that's coming in the form of federal investment, which otherwise would not come to the state of Vermont. So what you're doing is both producing housing and bringing a significant level of investment into the state's economy.
Now, this doesn't, like, when I look at this spreadsheet, what I think would be helpful moving forward is like putting in yellow or red, and I just mean theoretically, the ones that get delayed or stopped for a construction season because of a permit holdup. We want to be able to start, not trying to say there's a dollar figure strictly on this, but this is how many of the projects have time delays that have to do with for unforeseen permitting.
Yeah, I think we can.
Or cause, or what reason, I mean, right, the question is, what's the reason they're delayed?
So
Right, it's not just necessarily permitting.
Not just-
reasons for delay could be many and varied.
Yes, yeah,
From elevator delay to
Yeah.
an actual appeal to
Right.
just going
And-
through the.
like that is good data for us. Is it labor shortage? Is it, a permit holdup? Is it
think
a
what
shortage of
we-
elevators and showers around, like,
I think that's great data. I think we're gonna have to report on it more across the whole portfolio and not so much on individual projects.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the size and scope of this, that would involve the review of each of those projects.
Right.
And that might present a challenge, but I think what we can do as we continue to have discussions is talk about what trends we're seeing. And what are the trends that are leading to either delays, or we're also doing things to speed up the development
Right.
pipeline.
Because that's what we'd
Exactly.
love to hear.
yes.
Okay.
Anything that gives us policy information that we could be helpful.
Yeah,
in speeding
Things we can actually affect.
yeah, both VHCB and VHFA have pre-development support that helps accelerate the timeline.
Mhm.
We provide feasibilities and support to projects to help them move along.
Mhm.
So I think also looking at those is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
The other pieces that are in here are, again, a reconciled list of home ownership between VHCB and VHFA. And again, you're gonna see a lot of overlap there.
Just a quick, is that equity, is that shared equity?
The homeownership through VHCB is gonna be shared equity, and then it's gonna be other mechanisms.
Something
as
else.
well.
Existing middle.
So it's shared equity plus others.
Yes, when you see the word equity at the top of the columns, it doesn't reference shared equity at all.
Okay.
We're reusing
Yeah, I
the
didn't see it
word.
on the column. I'm just trying to figure out what homeownership
Equity in the
is.
other-
She just wants,
Okay.
yeah, what kind of homeownership?
It's on the other spreadsheet it
Oh,
talks
okay.
about. See how it says equity?
Oh,
State
credit
tax credit equity, I thought
Right.
that's what you were asking about.
No,
That's
but
different.
what is this? Is this,
Is this, do we know percentage wise, this is, who VHCB's percentage of homeownership, VHFA's percentage of homeownership?
Yeah, so if you look at the summary page of
Okay.
homeownership projects, you see it broken down.
And we have this whole workbook.
You have this all in front of you, and
Okay,
Magali is it posted as well. It's probably
It is.
easiest to view on a computer.
yeah,
But this is the key thing for those of us who.
it's somewhere in my pile.
This is eye-friendly,
Yeah.
older eye-friendly summary.
So going back to this one,
but what is home ownership? Or I guess I'm assuming that it means
So in
person ends up owning that home.
Yes,
Not a corporation, but an individual person ends up owning the home.
it's shared equity that through VHCD is administered through our regional nonprofit partners, and then Maura can speak to the missing middle program.
Okay, so it's
But it
shared
results
equity
in
and missing middle.
largely
Yes.
those two.
Okay. Okay.
The other two tabs here, the commissioner can talk about the VHIP. I will say that this is not a reconciled list, so there are some VHIP units that are included in projects that have VHCD funding and maybe VHFA as well.
Those are
And
the bigger ones, I would assume, not the individual homeowner ones.
yes, yeah, they're multifamily. I think an example of that is work we did with Joker Insurance in Bradford, I believe, it's Bradford building, not Sperley building. Which has some VHCD units and some VHIP units. And then another pandemic era program that's funded a lot of housing around the state is the CRRP program at the Department of Economic Development. I'm gonna apologize for not having their acronym on the tip of my tongue. And what I'll say about this tab is there are probably half of these projects are also have funding and are funding staff.
Does anyone in the room know what CRRP stands for?
I forgot.
No, I'm sure.
Alex, it's your age.
Yeah.
That's not an acronym we throw around a lot.
No.
Community recovery and revitalization program. So
Oh, okay.
this was
Well,
through DED.
Okay.
Chris,
So-
let's see.
Well,
So it's community revitalization and recovery.
And this was ARPA funding.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I knew it was ARPA, I just.
So that's one-time funding, not recurring. And do we have that here somewhere?
Yes, it should be the
And
last.
it's all,
spreadsheet.
is it all appropriated now, like in terms of for different projects, it's all spent or in the pipeline?
Yeah.
Oh, this little one.
So there's some mobile home communities,
Yeah, the mobile home communities you're really seeing showing up. And this is a place we could probably do more refining of the spreadsheet. You're seeing them show up on what's called the rental project tab. That's VHCD and VHFA. They're not all rental communities. They're some homeownership communities. What's not in here is a list of MER
mobile home repair.
programs, the investments they've made. So I think
You're testing our knowledge of all of that.
Yes, we are.
It's good though.
It's
Well-
good, I'm glad.
And I don't have that. I have just this. And that
Sorry, I
shows
went
the
back to,
units,
sorry, I went back to a different.
but I thought that had the units. Oh, that does not have the units. The crop.
It does not, we didn't receive the units for them.
Are they additional units or are they part of?
Most of these were part of, I think most of these were projects that were funded with other sources. The reason it's harder for us is DED doesn't typically fund housing projects, so these are a subset of a larger,
Okay.
I could do.
Well, since it's one time and that's fine, because I also want to have a conversation about how laborious it is to prepare all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying I don't want you to prepare, because I do, so I really, really appreciate the use, but there might be a way to make it easier to prepare.
Oh, my God, it's right here, okay. I don't have it. Here.
It's this huge one.
This came with me.
Well, they're not the big ones.
But that's yesterday.
Do you want mine, Anne, for now?
I'm fine, I was watching up there, but at some point I'd like.
I think I made it.
They might have.
I have,
Okay, we found, okay, it was in the pile somewhere.
So I think we wanna get to the cost, the like rough cost per type of project.
Okay.
Does that exist? Like I was otherwise gonna do some math here.
and the total unit.
Yeah, could we just, yeah, and at some point just cruise with this
Yeah,
nice
yeah.
summary chart.
Yeah, I think just in terms of some zooming out a little bit and saying that through VHCB's program, you're seeing a lot of small numbers here, big picture across our housing programs, some of which are included on the spreadsheet, some are not. We've helped to house and shelter close to 4,000 households since the
Yeah.
pandemic.
And how much money is that with $800 million?
That is with 200,
That's
roughly
pretty.
400.
240.
Okay, but I guess I'm looking at the total, which isn't those other two figures put together.
Right, it's the
Yeah.
total development cost, so that's the private folks too.
Okay, so if you add up VHB and VHFA numbers, you get more like 550. But you're,
It's more like our public money that we invested over 500 million of sort of COVID era.
and that's just for rental and manufactured home.
And then there's private.
Or
Basically, so we have, you know, CHT in the room and part of this is having a long-term discussion about taking an honest look at how much $800 million buys us, you know, if we need to start looking at the best way to bring the most units online. And some of those, you know, many of those need to continue to be affordable. That's government's major job in all of this. But we also just need to build more units of housing each year. So when you talk about what do you want to see in the future for everyone's sake, we need to start seeing that if we invest a certain amount, we're solving some of our problem. We're meeting certain.
So I think what I say to that is that you see on this, especially in this rental tab, the VHCB investment is the state investment. That is the Vermont
Right.
public dollars.
Okay.
What you're seeing in the
Final call.
Vermont public dollars plus the federal grants that we administer.
Okay.
What you're seeing in the VHFA, those predominantly are going to be, and Maureen will speak to this, those are predominantly federal tax credits that are bringing in private investment
Okay.
from, so that's not, so the state of Vermont hasn't appropriated that $790,000.
Yes.
That is what what you're seeing here is that the state investment of 200 is leveraging those,
Yes.
those additional dollars.
That helps so much, and in the future, if someone who isn't getting an explanation was looking at this, it would be great to see for every, like, here's the state dollars you put in, here's the federal tax credits, here's private you know, like, just to be able to see that, so I don't look at it and say, did we spend $800 million on this?
And I think that's why we're having this conversation
Yeah.
to know how we can refine this spreadsheet that says it
Mhm.
in here,
Right,
but not in a way that a layperson's gonna understand.
exactly, and we are like,
And so maybe at the beginning of next session, we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
talk about how that
that's
works.
my only feedback.
And simplistically,
And
one of the things I think that our former chair loved was saying, oh, downtown tax credits, they're modest, but they leverage 17-1. So that we get, you know, that's the kind of thing that is very useful for us as we talk generally with the public about how much these investments leverage and what percentage and how many times.
Yeah.
Is the leveraging consistent? In other words, are there circumstances during this period and projected in which the amount of leverage will change? Or the effect of the investments we make on federal funding will perhaps change?
I wonder if
I was gonna say maybe
More
others can
yeah,
jump
with
in
me?
and co-present.
uh,
I don't want you to
Yeah,
feel
I
like
don't-
it's all on your shoulders, and we have till 9:15, so I don't wanna stop the flow of.
I don't wanna
Yeah.
keep my colleagues from having a chance to answer these questions as
Right.
well. I think big picture, I think more can talk about how the 4% versus 9% credits and availability of those changes the leverage and have an incredible opportunity with the state investment to leverage 4% credits and bring new money into the state. I think big picture, as we're thinking about where are we putting dollars and why are we putting them into production of affordable housing, when you look at rent burden across income brackets, those at the lowest end of the spectrum, living in poverty, it's now up to 75% of those families that are paying over 50%
Yeah.
for rent.
Yes.
Yeah.
That falls to below 25 when you look at households that are at 100% AMI. So it
Right.
falls pretty dramatically. So that to me says we have a continued need for
Mhm.
additional affordable subsidized housing.
75% over 50 or over 30, because over 50.
Yeah.
And that's in a slide
Important.
that is at
Right.
the end of my presentation
Right.
that I wanted you to have as a reference and
Yeah.
a number from Harvard.
And we don't wanna pit any different types of housing against each other. We wanna get the right mix so that we know we're spending fewer dollars, but they're going further for moderate income people while we still focus on low income folks and their need for affordable housing. Senator Weiss, did you wanna ask?
At some point, I get letters saying, you know, we need to create housing. How many new units have we created? Is there a summary somewhere?
No, it's right.
It's
yeah.
here.
It's here with
So-
VHFA and VHCB, which is the majority of the units. Yeah.
The 390.
It was 550 and that's not reflected.
Yeah, so total funded units, 3,409
Oh.
as of February when we started putting this together. And we've had board meetings since then to fund additional projects.
So
And that's just rental and
That's just,
manufactured home.
that's rental and manufactured home.
The shelter's not pulled out of that, it's separate.
It is separate from that
that's
number.
not
It's-
housing, that's.
Yeah.
Well, the homeownership's housing, I just wanna make sure those two are totally separate
I'm just
numbers.
wondering how, when somebody asks, how many units have we created for the $500 million now, we're
Yeah.
at 8 that we put in, and it is 3.5.
And just to clarify, you're not, the state investment is not 800.
This is, it's a V, money we give to VHC.
So VHC be leveraging the rest of this.
Leveraging.
Right.
But I guess, and one of our earlier questions, just looking at these numbers is who is the 240 million that is the difference between VHFA and VHCB's
Private.
in the 800? Is that all private investment? Between the totals of
Okay, yeah.
VHFA
Laura's
and
probably-
VH,
Goodness,
yeah,
we'll let
that's all,
Laura
is that
go.
all private investment? No.
I
okay,
do
so-
just want, like, we all need to think about questions that we're answering for our constituents. I will speak to my bias, which is that homeownership projects cost more, but are a really different way of helping people with permanent stability. Permanent stability. So, I care a lot about homeownership separate from rental and manufacturing. The students health
Yeah,
board is gonna speak.
But
to this.
also, home equity is a way to keep it affordable.
You mean shared equity?
Shared equity.
Well, that is homeownership. Those
No,
are.
I understand, but there's
Yeah.
other kinds of home ownership that don't have that requirement, and so.
Right, but
It's
missing middle
different.
missing middle homeownership, allowing someone to afford to buy a home.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good
Just
thing,
as
it's
good,
all
yeah.
good.
Say, homeownership is an important component of our program.
Yeah.
We need to stop
Yeah.
sharing in order to allow more into sharing. But I can always bring back up the spreadsheet if we want to dive back into it.
Thank you. I'm Maura Collins with VHFA for the record, and I am going to share my screen a little bit.
Do you want
And
this?
no, thank you. Leave that to the person. So I just want to take a deep breath and slow down a little bit and remind you all that this report that you're seeing is just one of many reports. You can see up here that every 5 years we do the needs assessment. It's coming out in May. I'm sure you're unhappy about the timing of that, but that is the federal cycle we're on. I have a little screenshot of that map is, the ongoing data that every month is getting updated on housing data website. So if you're looking for data, we promise we got it. I also want to draw your attention to something we haven't been talking about, which is a screenshot of DHCD's website called the Housing Budget and Investment Report. Now, this would answer a lot of the questions you all are having. And as you can see, at least what they posted goes back to 2014. I think it goes back farther than that.
You always show us things that you should know.
And so bear with me while I share a different screen so I can show you what that report
Mhm.
produces every year.
And that was presented to JFO. That was kind of the summary presented to the joint fiscal committee, the joint fiscal, JFO.
I skipped over 12 pages of very important
Yeah.
text that explains the context of things, just to show you, and I'm not gonna walk through this in detail, but just look at the header of these tables.
Yes.
This is state funding for the different housing
Mhm.
agencies. And you can see the totals here across the
Is it
board.
possible to blow that up a tiny bit?
This is,
The sources, that's really good.
but then, look, I'm just whetting your appetite.
I know, you are,
Look
you
at
are.
this,
I
I'm gonna
just
show you all the federal money that goes to the agencies. So when VHCD is talking about the state money, they're saying, oh, there's also federal money in here. And then we bring things together. This is state and federal and private equity money
Cool.
brought all together. And you can see not only the sources of it, you can see the uses of it. You see homeownership down here as well as multifamily.
Right, and this trues up when you look over 4 years.
And
with this,
then
essentially,
not only is there construction money, but we know that there needs to be rental assistance. And how and where is that going to? But wait, there's more. The last one, I know you can't draw conclusions because I'm going so fast. Oop,
I know.
the last one, oh, down here is also,
Appreciate it.
down here is services.
nice.
This is
Oh,
a
wow.
lot of AHS programs.
Okay.
They're in the mix.
Okay.
So every year, we all, the people you see here today, get together and we present this to you all, put it on the website, you can track it over time. We all decided, I hope you agree, because we did it a couple years ago, we made the decision that we weren't going to pervert the long-standing data trends of federal and state investments by talking about all the ARPA money. It was different. It
Yeah.
was one time, it was whatever.
Right.
If all of a sudden it looks like the state doesn't like housing anymore, if all of a sudden it
Mhm.
shoots up to some number and then
Right,
back down. So in the
Right.
wordy report that I didn't share, it would have told you that actually there's more, go elsewhere, look for it. And then you start seeing these reports because we are trying to
right.
report on that.
I think not the only, but one of the big values of looking at the ARPA money as a separate universe is it was almost like waving a magic wand. It was like,
Yes.
if we could wave a magic wand and fund housing, what would we do? And what impact did that have?
And that's what I'm
If
gonna
we
speak.
try to wave another magic wand.
Well,
So-
and it gives us a sense of what we get when we spend a lot of money.
That's right.
So that's what, I just wanna point out that, we don't look at demographics of ARPA funded housing, separate from other funding programs, but as has been spoken about, the big elephant in the room is the federal tax credit program. Nationally, it's the largest creator of affordable rental housing in the country. It's the 5th largest tax expenditure in the federal government. It's huge. And so we look at who's served by tax credit housing. It's a good proxy for who's being served by the investments you all have made. You can see here some of the statistics. The median renter income, which is lower than homeowners income, is 43,000. But the median of this kind of housing we're talking about today is just over 16,000, so about 17,000. You see that 75% of these households are racially led by someone who says that they're white and no other race, so white alone. Whereas if we looked at Vermont, that's closer to 10% of renters are BIPOC led, and so it's 90% are white alone. So we're hitting a part of the market that otherwise would not be served. We also, these investments are hitting the state in a really geographically equitable way. This chart has too many numbers on it, but it was used for something else, so I grabbed it. What you can look at is the green bars for every county is how many cost burden renters are there. And the orange yellowy bar is how many apartments have we developed with any kind of public subsidy, ARPA and others over time that have gone to those counties. Now, Washington County stands out to me
Yeah.
as being in some need. Wyndham County and Windsor are standing out to me as having some additional units compared to this. But honestly, when we start putting numbers in here, we start realizing that this ebbs and flows over the years and 1 percentage point with rounding can make things
Yeah.
look big. But you can see that we are not just deciding where the ARPA investments go, but we're looking at this in totality, and looking at these different.
And I just want to be fair to Lamoille too, like it looks like a small gap, but that's kind of what they're saying, we're small, but we have a meaningful gap for the size of our.
Absolutely. Now, to the cost point that you've been asking about, I keep showing you this picture of the cake and that as costs go up, we have to add layers, we have to add more funding. Have the same amount of cake, my piece is still only this big, but I need more money to get there. You can see the chart at the bottom shows this is just the projects that came in for tax credit housing and what the average cost per unit is. You can see that it was about around say 310,000 per unit in 2019 before the pandemic. It's now over $500,000 per unit. So If I had $10 million and I had no leverage and I did nothing creative, but I had that $10 million and I was spending 310,000 a unit, I could build a 32 unit building. Now, in today's dollars, that could only build a 19 unit building. We've lost housing because of the increase in cost. But we are doing things about this. That is not an unchecked runaway train. We are doing things. In 2019, we all worked together on a cost study. There were recommendations that came out of that. We've implemented some of those recommendations. Others we're still working on. We also have been raising more money, not from you all, but from other places, to add those layers of the cake. We have 17 million in a housing investment fund that we privately raised from philanthropy and the US Treasury. Yesterday, another application to the US Treasury for $6 million to come to Vermont went in, hope it passes. We are doing our part to address this. This pie chart gets to what you were asking about what are the sources of all this money? Using the chart that you have in front of you, I created this pie chart. And Maura's groupings are, if you added together the coronavirus relief funds and the ARPA money, that's about 25% of what you see in this chart since 2020. VHCB's one-time money was in there. There's other VHCB money, and I'm hearing Polly say that's a mix of state and federal, because they administer HUD programs. The elephant in the room is that federal tax credit equity, that's a big piece. Y'all do a state tax credit program that is smaller but important. And then we have some permanent loans that are amortizing and debt. And that's of the investments that our agencies are administering. In addition to that, this pie chart would have more slices. If you folded in, the question was, is everything that's not administered by VHCB and VHFA private equity?
Right.
And I would say no. I'd hop back to my housing budget investment report and I'd say it's HUD money, other HUD money that DHCD administers, it's rural development money, it's some energy money. We got our utilities now chipping in a little bit for housing, not enough. We have equity and what the developer puts in. There's some other sources. This is just the pie chart of our two agencies because we had pulled it together.
Does it include first generation? The first generation million?
No, it would not include, this is all rental, I'm sorry, this is homeownership and rental, but it does not include first gen.
Okay, I'm only asking because this is the pie to help close the racial ownership gap, right? I mean, like, this is where making gains to rate not be the fifth largest racial ownership gap in the country would have to. This is where we're gonna close that gap.
So I want to speak to homeownership.
Okay, I saw.
It's it's important piece. When I look at the housing budget and investment report of years past, roughly, this isn't fair, but I'm gonna say like $2 million a year is going to homeownership. Lately, $41 million is in this spreadsheet saying going to homeownership.
Right.
And that's a change.
I
And
wanna
that-
see that is closing the racial ownership gap.
And I agree. And if I may, edit a comment you said of like, I know homeownership's expensive. It's actually cheaper on a per unit basis than rental because you have the person buying the home.
Right,
I mean, the
right.
biggest thing is that they're getting a mortgage and they're paying that mortgage.
Yes.
So we all as public funders don't have to pay that piece. That's not the case on rental.
Right.
And so it's actually cheaper investment.
Yeah.
But come into the questions of perpetual affordability, permanent affordability, you know, do we want to make these investments if it's not protected? So this is a balancing act. But this is what you all have done is you've shifted the game from being 60 to $65 million of rental and 2%, $2 million of it being homeownership to really changing that dynamic. You also, and this is the nerdy thing I just have to say before I'm done, is that you also have unlocked the use of something called private activity bonds. They're the tax exempt bonds that VHFA has been administering for the 50 years. Prior to the pandemic, we would use about $14 million a year of private activity bonds. When we get allocated a certain amount every year, we can only hold on to
Like
them
home.
by the federal government. That tells the state of Vermont, you're allowed to administer so much private activity bonds every year. VHFA and VITA and the bond bank and actually VSAC, Student Assistance Corporation, have a little thumb wrestle and we decide how, we recommend how much of these bonds should go to each of our uses. Housing's been getting a ton of it because VSAC now uses less of these now that the feds took over.
Who was the third thumb wrestler?
Bond bank, VITA,
Okay.
VHFA and VSAC.
Okay,
So what's been happening is that it's use it or lose it.
yeah.
The feds say you have private activity bonds, you don't use them for 3 years, you can no longer issue them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So, yeah, and
We've
the bond
been-
bank is the issuer of.
we each issue,
Oh,
all
you
4 of
each
us
issue.
do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been using about $14 million a year on multifamily prior to when the ARPA money was available. Now that the ARPA money is available, the most recent year, just popped up to $37 million. And it's gonna be higher in the future. Because we have 3 years, when they say you can issue this much tax exempt bonding, they then say, but you can keep rolling that over for 3 years, you got time to do it. And so I'm telling you how much the 37 million was from what we were allocated back in 2021. Because we actually had 3 years to do it, so I got 22 money, 23 money. This number is gonna keep going up. You are unlocking tax exempt borrowing that wasn't previously available.
Is
That is
there-
probably the most important thing
Yeah.
that you all have done with the ARPA.
Can you give me a rough proportion, like if we spend X on homeownership, we unlock X amount more of private activity bonds?
I cannot in this moment. I need
Okay,
to think
but
about that.
thanks.
That's making my
Okay.
brain hurt.
Okay.
But I'll think about that more.
Yeah.
So not only is that tens of millions of dollars more in low cost borrowing,
Mm-hmm.
when you spend more than half of your housing development on this tax exempt borrowing, boom, you automatically get these unlimited federal tax credits. That's private equity going in. So you have done so much in terms of leverage by making these ARPA investments.
I wanna put a pin in, this is the kind of story we wanna tell
Yes.
for future investment. I'm
Yes.
not gonna speak for anybody else, but I care a lot about homeownership. I care a lot about people not just having an affordable place to rent, but being able to look ahead and see a stable life where they have equity and own their home, and that closes the wealth gap. That is the one thing in the country that closes the wealth gap. So I wanna start seeing this yearly and broken out by demographic and like, how are we closing the wealth gap and closing the homeownership gap?
And I wanna
Something
be
I wanna
clear
see all the
that
time.
those tax credits that get unlocked,
Yeah,
just for rental, it's not gonna be for homeownership.
the tax credit.
Yeah.
That's what the
Thanks.
private
The
activity
private
fund.
activity bonds can go to both homeownership and rental.
Okay,
But we don't use the private activity bonds for building the homeownership units,
Mhm.
just for doing our mortgage program. That's what we use, and I'm not reporting
But that's still
on
pretty
that
good,
here.
right? That helps someone have an
I think
affordable
so,
mortgage.
yeah.
Okay,
But your ARPA investments have unlocked us to do
to do more
more with
homeownership.
homeownership.
Okay,
It has unlocked us to do more on the rental side, which if I made you dizzy and went back to my slide about the low incomes we're serving and the homeless units that are
Right.
reported and all that, is still.
But then can I make sure I understand this? It is up to us in the state to fund homeownership in a way that unlocks more capacity for homeownership. That's not something the federal government tends to give us money for.
The federal government makes a 30-year fixed rate mortgage and does everything around making the financing more affordable. They do not
About the
not
construction.
much around creating the units. You all have created the units by
Okay.
investing in VHCB and what they do with homeownership and the middle income program.
But
Okay.
they enable it with mortgage, with other
But
finance.
then people come and get mortgages.
So may I just ask,
Yeah.
so what happened? What happened that triggered our ability to access these,
Excellent question.
thank,
So,
private, activity funds?
yeah, so
Because we did something different.
you did. And what you did is, if this pie chart were, instead of being what it is, just picture a pie chart and I'm trying to build an affordable rental building. And I can get only 30 or 40% of that paid by tax credits. And I can only get 10 or 15% of it paid by the state money that goes through VHCB, and I can get another 10% from the federal government or something like that. That's not 100%. I got a gap there, probably of 20 or 30% that I can't fill. When you all made the historical investment of the ARPA resources to VHCB, that filled that gap, and now all of a sudden, those projects move forward, we increased production, and we were able to use these tax credits, whereas they would have just expired and they never would have been used, and that project never would have moved forward.
Got it. So ARPA money, that cash infusion enabled us.
That's what did it. And so these kind of numbers, 3,000 units, would have never been possible without that investment. It shows what you all are doing.
And
And
can I just follow up on that? So it's cash, not policy. It's funding, not policy, is what I'm hearing, what we did.
Thank us.
I would say that you did more. I'm talking about the subsidized affordable housing was
Yeah.
cash. You also, in the the Home Act last year, you all did policy that also helped with the private market rate housing. So you did even more than that, because it's not just funding, you also did some policy.
Right, but that was just last year.
Mhm.
But you were saying this is over a period of.
Oh,
3
right,
years.
because if you
So
go back.
I'm just
yeah.
trying to figure out how we keep doing what we
Mhm.
did right.
Mhm.
And it sounds like it's funding essentially more than changing policy.
Allowing the state dollars, which flow predominantly through VHCB, to fill that gap, and that's what allows these credits to be drawn
Okay,
down.
so there is a policy component. So if you
Yeah,
could
there's
just
a
let
big
us
cash
know another time.
component.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to end on, is,
I have
But-
one, if I could
okay,
just say
yeah,
this.
okay, so
I wanna say, speaking, bringing together the money with the policy. Gus hears me too often and say like, I don't like it that these reports are saying, here's what's the housing we've done, because we've done more than housing. What you see are the top 3 bullets. What you see in this report are where we've built apartments, we've revitalized downtowns, and that there's historic structures,
Yeah.
Springfield and elsewhere,
Yeah.
that we've revitalized.
right,
What housing dollars are going to, but don't show up here, is all the dirty soil that we've cleaned up. The fact that these are great platforms for social services, we are putting housing dollars into having community rooms where people can deliver services. Now, actually, if Chris were up here, he'd tell you that CHD is actually funding services. They have 7 or 9 social workers on staff. They're actually doing the social service work because AHS's budget isn't
Yeah,
keeping up with
like
what's needed.
Mhm.
We are lowering greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal sector in the way we heat these buildings. We're lowering those emissions in terms of transportation because they're smart growth downtowns.
Mhm.
We're expanding water, sewer, roads, lights, all this for future market rate development. We are doing so much more than housing. And so these investments and policies, because the way we're spending the money is also doing all of this. And in some ways, it's even bigger than building some apartments. And I'm not even talking about the outcomes for the people living there and what these apartments mean for them.
yes.
That's a great slide. Thank you.
It is a great site, but I think my concern is, as we have less cash to invest in filling that gap, we're gonna lose the private activity funds.
They will still exist. You likely will not be, they'll be
They're looking at
expiring.
us that figure on, for every dollar we put in, we unlock X amount in private activity bonds. However,
Yeah.
rough it is.
Right, but I think that is what you're seeing is what cash got us, but what we're gonna start losing without investing more cash into housing and keeping that gap filled.
I will let more.
And that
respond
was
to that.
the, I went back and reread Treasurer Beth Pierce's report from a few years ago when the legislature charged her with figuring out how do you fund 1,000 units of housing? And I was rereading it last night.
Can you send that to us?
One of her biggest, things she was pointing out was, we have all this expiring private activity bond capacity,
Mhm.
and we wanna leverage that. She didn't want, she wanted to be utilizing that, but in order to do that, you had to fill this gap.
Exactly. That's
So
what I'm trying to.
I'm gonna have the final word now in saying that I promise everyone, you can hold me accountable to this. That next year, we will begin with a conversation about dedicated revenue and increased sustained funding for housing. That is not something that we could responsibly do this year, because I will say, as much as we value the work that was done in the House and by Chris, we can't back ourselves into, well, this is how much money we have and, you know, this is who it's for. I want the entire housing community to be at the table talking about, you know, what it will take to meet our 7,000 plus new units we need every year. And that will take the entire housing community, not just the affordable housing community, not just one part of the affordable housing community. How much of that is homeownership? How we get to healthy vacancy rates for both homeownership and rental. And we are doing the heavy lifting on permit reform first, because that brings down the timeline and the cost of doing that. And then I think many people will feel more comfortable in making that investment stretch as best we can. So long as a majority of the B home bill makes it across the finish line, our conversations will turn to long-term sustained funding. The infrastructure piece Gus and I were talking about yesterday, when we look at the property tax, for example, we have deferred maintenance. I mean, we have depreciating property that isn't helping us grow the grant list. So starting to get creative about where those revenue sources come from, what they fund that's under the tip of the iceberg, and then how we layer on top of that more revenue for housing is just a critical conversation that I want us to have in a thoughtful way with everyone at the table. That is close to what happened this year, but it wasn't all the way there. It wasn't something that we could sort of decide halfway through session we could do, and it's I think better to have a process where we feel really confident in the numbers we're putting forward next year. So you can hold me accountable to, we are having the funding discussion. But right now in FY25, the Senate now has more money for housing than the House does in our proposed budget. So we're not missing some part of the conversation. We're doing, you know, a lot for FY25 with a flood impact for housing. And I want everyone at the table for the conversation about how everyone gets the units of housing they need for next year and how we reduce the cost burden on our low and moderate income.
And I would like to just reassure you all that there's not a way we're not cutting this data. I know I overwhelm you with data, there's
Right.
so much I don't ever show you.
This is good.
So,
Yes.
when you were asking, talking about project delays, I wanna say, we are working collaboratively with our partners to have quarterly reports that all developers will be submitting to us, where we're tracking when was the last cost estimate, when was their expected construction start, when was it supposed to end, and how will that change? When you say, like, I wanna know what's causing these delays, is it permitting, is it
Yeah.
funding, is it cost overruns? We have been tracking that, we are telling you those answers already, and it is all the reasons. There's no silver
There's
bullet
no
here.
one reason.
And so you don't have to wait for more data, because we are telling you what we're seeing, which is it is a case by case basis. Yes, there's some cases that go to the state Supreme Court. Yes, there's some elevator components that are 2 years delayed. Yes, there's some labor shortages that are causing these, and it's all true. And so we're telling you that, like, if we were to qualitatively code all the projects and what's causing these delays,
Mhm.
there would be more than one per project. And it'd be all over the map and it would not be a single reason.
Right.
So we have the data on the projects. I'd love to keep utilizing the tools we have, meaning housing budget and investment report, meaning this interagency report where we all track all
Right.
these investments twice a year. And I'd rather not spend staff's time on one-off reports
Nobody
in some
likes
ways.
to
So
go
how do
out
we
for it.
build the
I
answers
do
to the
wanna
questions we
see-
need into what we're already doing?
I didn't see enough about closing racial homeownership gaps. I wanna know more about closing gaps in
And
homeownership.
we have to fund homeownership.
Mm-hmm.
And that will take sustained statewide investment
Right.
because we,
But we didn't see what we've spent, how that's broken.
But you're
down.
gonna see some from CHT fairly soon.
And-
Big on that.
and I will say, I
We
think
need
I
to
showed
see
you for the first gen program.
Yeah,
VHFA historically, this is not something I'm proud of. 3% of our borrowers have been led by people of color over the last 5 years, but last year, the first year we had first gen, that tripled up, now it's 9%.
That's great.
Cause 20 some odd percent of the first gen folks are led by people of color, those households. And so yesterday I was with a bank CEO and they were inviting VHFA to convene a meeting of bankers about how can they all do more and put their money into this. So we're making progress. Just last plug, I'm very nervous that if I don't have the first gen program, I don't know if they're gonna stay at the table with me to be figuring out how to do more first gen through their regulators.
Mhm.
So I'm very excited by these opportunities, but it started with investments from the state that is now spurring private conversations, which is exactly what good government people think.
right. And that's why you saw us agree with approach on another million there. And rest assured, we're not done with permit reform either. You know, we might be done with Act 250 for a year or two, but there are many, many other permits as well that cause delays and costs that we may want to look at as well. So,
We haven't even started at A&R.
Okay, but if we're talking about getting rid of this report, I wanna
No, we're
have
not-
more of a
oh, sorry.
conversation. Well, that's what I heard, but.
But we have an interagency report
Yeah,
that we've
so-
done for years that
Yeah,
actually is
so
more
maybe
valuable
that'll-
than that.
yeah,
is
so-
that,
Let's
gets at.
see that, so I did, what I heard was, this is a pain, and I totally understand, I expected this, but
that might be where
but
we're at.
the information is very useful, so let's just not get
Which-
rid of it until we have a conversation, that's all I'm asking.
So let's make sure we understand, I mean, what was really helpful was you pointing out that there's an annual report that helps us with this, the overall spending. You're saying, Wendy, that you want to make sure we still see an itemized
Well,
list or?
I don't think we need to talk about it now because we're in a hurry, but because I'd rather us just have a, meaningful conversation about it. But I expect that this is a lot of work, and if it's not necessary for us to have the information, of course, I don't want us to put in extra work on that. But this is valuable information, so I just wanted
I'd be
to,
happy to show up in
Yeah.
January with our interagency report that's been doing this kind of thing. This was pulling out the largely ARPA investments and
Mhm.
shining a light on that. What I'm
Yeah,
talking
and
about
VHIP too, I
puts
think
it
this
all
was-
together. But what, the
Yeah.
reason I like looking at everything together, I know why you wanna see ARPA because there's a lot of conversation about ARPA. Why it's better to look at it all together is because different sources of money are best used in different ways at different times. And like, if we know we're getting a lot of tax credits over here, then we know we need to put more ARPA money over there. And that gets to the shelter investments and things like the tax credits don't go to shelter investments. So we,
Oh, yeah.
it is filling holes. that-
and my interest wasn't specifically ARPA because that was done before I was here, but like VHIP and seeing the amount per unit of VHIP is wonderful.
Mhm.
And that helps me promote it and support it. So there's lots of reasons, but let's just talk before we.
Okay, so we're,
Yes.
yes, I think that's great. I mean, this will be iterative in the fall. But we will start with the data, we will end with the data, we will, we want. But this is a piece of the housing market. You also come in and help us understand what's happening in the private side. So do other housing partners of ours, and that's gonna be really important for us to make sure we are looking at going forward because we need units for everyone, so.
Yes, and I'm glad, just one other comment. I've been tracking a few private projects in my area and they are just as expensive. So when folks say that government costs are X per unit, many private projects are that cost too. It's not because the government's doing it. I just,
Well, the government's making it more expensive.
the government's also making it possible.
I was
The
gonna say,
government
I'm just
money
making it
is
possible.
is going with that below the iceberg, below the water stuff. That's happening with a lot of the subsidized housing that is not always being done on private. Also, I can't tell you how often I have developers telling me, I can build a unit for under 300 grand. I'm like, that's right. But then when you say, do you have the land, do you have the permitting, do you have the infrastructure, do you have all that? Well, no, that's gonna be 500. I'm like, well, I know, but I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be shady and tell you what it costs to just build the unit.
Right.
It's not honest.
Right.
We have
Right,
to talk
right.
about
You
what
have
it
to look at
takes
it
to get it
holistically. Right.
occupied.
Yeah, and we
But-
need both. I'm not saying we
No,
don't
and
do both.
I'm not disagree, I hate how we're getting stuck in binaries.
Right, I don't
We
want
need density, because if you sink
Yeah.
cost into the infrastructure and into the ADA accessibility and into steel and concrete, you then need, whether you're private or public, to be able to get the units that actually reflect the investment you've just made in infrastructure. And our permit system doesn't always kill projects, it just reduces the density until we have lost the value of the investment in the infrastructure that we have all made.
It can.
It can, we're
But we're
trying to
working on it,
enable it to do the exact.
I'm not,
But it's very
telling you this,
helpful. Yeah.
I'm saying it to the world.
All right.
Thank you all. Oh, Alex, do you wanna put a fine point on it?
I'm just gonna, if I can just real quick.
Yes.
Because, one item that's not mentioned in this report, but touches a lot of these projects is CDBG, so that's
Okay,
Administered through Vermont Community Development Program, and
And what is that a year?
I'm glad you asked. It's only about 7 million, and that's about level from where it's been at.
but then Burlington
Years.
has its own.
Burlington is an entitlement community, so that means they get their own allocation. I wanna say around 1 million. But so we've only been getting that same amount for about the last 30 years, but the reason I bring it up is because there have been a couple of situations where the community development block grant money was the only source that triggered BABA, Build America, Buy America. And so that requires that the entire project abide by BABA requirements, and so depending on the year, either just wood or steel or maybe starting at FY 24, all materials have to be sourced in the US. So we've had at least one, possibly now another instance where, well, in one instance, we gave $750,000 to a project and they looked at it and their costs by having to abide by BABA were gonna far exceed that. So they said, no, thank you, keep that money. We're actually better off than having. So totally other topic, not for today, but just putting that in the mix. And
Interesting.
yeah, I think it'd be worth hearing about, maybe happy to come in.
And how can we affect increasing the CDBG money if it's been loan funded for the last 6 years?
I'd say talk to our congressional delegation, but I'm not sure that they can, they have really, Senator Leahy was a fierce advocate.
Oh, I know
for
he was.
CDBG.
Yeah, yeah.
Between DHCD and VHFA, are you going to continue to look at healthy vacancy in the state and present the number of annual units needed to have a healthy vacancy rate in the state?
I think they'll come sorting out that.
So
To continuing.
yes, and some of that's also gonna be a part of the housing needs assessment,
Okay.
and we'll continue to do that just as a,
You required that of us
Yeah.
in the Home Act, and then it's in legislation now to, for DHCD to report annually on progress toward that. But remember in the Home Act, it said, once the HNA comes out, then, there has to be these regional
Right.
targets, and then the localities
Yeah.
have to say what they're doing to implement those regional targets.
Are they still gonna be based on what healthy vacancy looks like?
Before you get started.
so, well, we've been in a lot of conversations about exactly that with
Yeah.
both VHFA and the RPCs, so
Is
that's
I
exactly.
don't know how else you do it.
No,
You have
I
to
mean,
have
this
healthy
is going to be pertinent to the final housing bill that comes out of the session.
Yeah.
I don't know that we felt we had time to look at what the House did. on the data targets because it felt like we were already asking for that and we didn't need to recreate that. But as we look at meeting our conservation goals, we want to put our housing goals right next to those in the language.
I think you'll
So
be happy with what the House came out with. We are very happy with what the
you
House
want
came out
that,
with.
so we can use, because the Climate Council has, housing and economic development goals as well that help us meet our climate change goals. So we're trying to figure out how we articulate how our housing goals are an environmental goal. So you think we should look back at the House language?
I like the House language. I don't see any drawbacks to it. I think
Okay.
the Home Act set, again, that there have to be these regional targets, and what the
Mhm.
House did was they said, and now DHCD has to show up every year and tell you all how we did on it. It's
Mhm.
modeled after the Building Homes Together campaign, where every year they would have they still have a press conference saying, we needed to build this many units and this many of them need to be affordable, and here's how we did. And you can then track that over time and it can spur some conversations. from there.
So DHCD wouldn't see it as additional work.
Well, I need to go back, I know we offered some comments, and I think they made some changes, we had
Okay.
a particular concern around the way they had tied it to the housing needs assessment, and we just
Okay.
thought, ooh, that's a HUD requirement, you don't necessarily want to
Got
tie to that,
Okay.
but in concept, that is something that we could take on.
Mhm.
Sean Gilpin's gonna be mad at me for saying that, but no, we can and would take on, just so long as it's. free of
Okay.
practice.
I have a desire to see us talk about vacancy goals
Yes.
somewhere in there and set a vision for what healthy vacancy looks like in statute.
And I think that is exactly what it would be tied to.
Okay, I don't think it's articulated in that bill.
I don't think it is, I think it just talks about housing goals.
Okay.
Right? Unit.
To look, because it all ties back to the Home Act, so you actually have to look at
Mhm.
the pieces of legislation, because I think the Home Act did articulate how those the overarching things have to be set.
Mhm.
And this just builds out the reporting of what was in the Home Act, and I see
Right.
John
Yeah.
nodding, he wrote the language.
No, I know, but
So-
to me, there's the in unit goals, but then there's what are we aiming for?
No, and it did,
If that
there
makes
is
sense.
language in the Home Act that did
Mhm.
articulate not just vacancy rates, but also talks about some equity issues and other things.
Great.
There were
I
three or
don't
four
think-
things in there.
Okay. Then let's look back at that for our final out bill. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
So can I just add a quick thing to that? So there ought to be a locational aspect to the data that shows whether it's in a compact area or sprawl. To be consistent with to be able to show how it helps the climate goals. We don't need to talk about it, but that's what I'm just suggesting that we can talk about that.
I don't wanna say it's a compact area or sprawl. I don't think we
No,
can do
well,
that.
Going back to
But
binary,
units
I don't know how to
different.
define that.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's hard to define, so.
Oh, I bet it is, but with the underneath part of the
Remember, we
iceberg.
have the
we don't
zoning
get-
atlas, we have
Yeah.
other places that will be able to be.
All
I
right,
also just put a quick mention in that we are internally working and we've actually consulted with these nice folks about ways, how can we do a better job of, rather than just looking at building permit data this year in May, as we're going throughout the year, how can we work with our municipalities, back to BLCT about this too, to know what's going on now, what's happening in terms of building permits, that might not catch everything,
Good.
just like the building permit now doesn't necessarily catch everything.
right,
What can we do to make sure that there's an ongoing monitoring of what's happening so that throughout the year.
great idea.
Long way away, we've got ABS, right, VLCT, we've talked to Leslie at VHFA about this, so a
Good,
number of us all working on this.
great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Hal.
Yes.
We are switching gears to data privacy, H121. Are people in the room or on Zoom who are on this?
Thank you, guys.
Right now?
Thanks, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, John.
Are they there?
No, they're all scheduled, so.
Oh, I saw that, that's right, we can second the building.
Okay,
They'll restart.
okay. As we move from adjournment, we should just keep that separate, just so I know when we're expecting to hear from people versus do a walkthrough.
Yeah, of course.
So what time did you say?
11.
11, okay, so we have the next hour and a half to walk through the changes that have been baked in the bill. So with an hour and a half, John, you can
I think we're
pace
good.
us in terms of people might have questions
Yeah.
as we go.
Yep.
Do we have to go?
I don't know.
Sorry, I just got it from John, it's on the website, but, Tony for,
And, yeah, no, and we also just got an email
From
the-
ADF.
from the Attorney General that we may want to see that's, she gave testimony last week, she hadn't seen the previous draft. And this seems to be a response to
I
that.
think we incorporated, we didn't just get that
No, we just got it
today.
just this morning.
What was that?
I'm
Can
not
you
memo
that, can you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, Sarah Seves, Attorney General's office. The Attorney General submitted a memo to the committee this morning.
I didn't get that.
I know, it just, I was looking at it because I had to send something else.
So the Attorney General knows we have a possible vote on this and sent us a
Yes, so
memo.
this provided important context on the draft that she had not seen last
Which draft has one page?
week. She had not seen the draft from April 10th.
So
before
we're,
she testified.
okay, so we're out a week. I, is this asking for changes or it's a philosophical memo?
I would say both.
What are you writing down the changes that it's asking for, or are you planning to?
Well, it's providing, no, I wasn't planning to testify. So
So
this is providing important context.
did you all see the possible vote on the bill?
Yes.
So this is something you might take somewhere else. How were you planning on presenting this to us if we got sent it?
Well, it's to provide, it's just to provide important context for you all as you consider the vote and it.
But
she
when
did not
was
see
we
the
have
draft.
it if she's not testifying? Do you want someone to testify?
I think actually, given this memo that I'm just cruising through here, it makes some sense for her to be able to testify about this, because she's strongly encouraging us to keep, private right of action. She's also sent her, I'm just looking at this for the first time, so and she has some concerns, major concerns about the Enforcement Oversight Board.
Well, that's okay. Actually, ADS gave us a helpful
Yeah.
look on that.
Good. So I mean,
That
I'm
would
looking
live
at
in
this for the
ADS.
first time,
Yeah.
there's some actual things we should, for us to consider.
So does someone want to testify from the AG's office today?
I'm happy to testify. if
So
would like us to
you would
do.
testify or?
Yes, I'm the representative here for the.
Okay, so within 11 to noon, just be prepared to testify to this. I think other testimony, so we'll have you go last because I think other testimony will help take care of the oversight board at least,
Right.
because ADS did give us some really.
I'm just looking through this fast, so
Okay, John, and question, were you were at least able to see the ADS?
I saw it right before I came in. I
Okay.
haven't, John Gray, obviously legislative council. I saw it, it looked, I can talk about the pieces when we get to them. I did send out a copy. It looked to me like 3 suggestions. Sorry. Tweaking the oversight board to work off of an existing council.
I think there are major concerns about it existing at all
Did this get passed?
from the
Yes.
SDR.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is this the summary?
So I, given the
Thank you.
concerns last time I presented this about identifying the differences, this just sets out each page where there's been a change, what it does, and I left a little box to the side if you want to take notes there.
Sorry,
Don't be very small though.
it starts on section 6. Am I crazy?
Page 6, pages.
Okay, these are pages. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, that, I'm gonna write that at the top, because that's.
Okay, and Wendy, did you get one?
I did, thank you.
John, you need one?
I'm good, thank you.
And it looks like Magali's going to get the copy of the bill.
And I will screen share, just since we were talking about the ADS memo, it looks like switching from the oversight board to AI council, passing development of that general opt-out, and then maybe modifying the thresholds. So
Yeah.
depending on you guys' attitude toward this, these are changes that I.
And
could
ADS
make.
is gonna come speak to it,
Yep.
so you're right, we'll have them testify before we decide. But I will just say, Senator Clarkson and I were both on the ops for the creation of the AI committee, and I didn't know that was ongoing, and I think that's the perfect place to start to house this stuff, so I was
I
grateful
think
for that
we didn't,
suggestion.
don't need to duplicate.
This is the Attorney General's memo and the copies of the facility.
Okay.
Okay, so pages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shall we jump in?
Yes.
Okay, so strat 2.1, finished up this morning.
Thank you.
We're gonna jump just to the changes unless you guys have questions about particular sections that you want more context on. But the first is page 6.
Which we're about to get, right, Magali?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
And up on the screen as well, if helpful.
Oh, great.
The first piece that you see here is just adding a definition for educational institution. This is being done because there's a modification to the FERPA data level exemption later on, which I'll come to. So this is just a flow through change from that update to the exemption section. So nothing substantive here to be concerned about. Definition section. We jump next to page 11. And this is a bit more of a substantive change. This was AG's request to modify the definition of publicly available information. Previously, this just contemplated information that is lawfully made available through federal, state, or local government records, or that a controller has a reasonable basis to believe that the consumer is lawfully made available.
So I don't know if I've seen this, is this was the one that came in email that
Exactly.
stakeholders also,
Exactly, that was part of that one.
Okay.
And I will call out later, there are sections of that text that have not been added here, and I will specifically call out when that is the case.
okay,
And if y'all want to change that, you're welcome to do that, but I will explain why I did not. But this was part of that,
okay,
exactly, this was part of that language. So this adds in that information that's lawfully made available through distributed news media would also constitute publicly available information. And to make clear, publicly available information excluded from the definition of personal data. So what you're doing is saying this kind of data, publicly available information, will not be subject to the act. And there are, in part, First Amendment reasons for this to be the case. The piece in C is a little bit interesting, is to say that to the extent that the controller has a reasonable basis to believe the consumer is lawfully made available certain information to the general public, that would be publicly available information unless it's sensitive data that's obtained under particular circumstances. I'm not entirely sure what the import of this would be. I do recall talking with Chris Curtis about the idea in the hallway, just spitballing about this. Given that we're talking about exclusively information where a controller has a reasonable basis to believe that the consumer has lawfully made it available.
can I stop?
Sure.
Dylan, you worked with the AG's office on the lawfully made available piece. Have you seen this new line?
Yes, for the record, Dylan's with you with Leon, but with Paris on behalf of LexisNexis. So the purpose of this is to better align the definition of publicly available information with what is found in other states. So making clear that if it's in Vermont Digger, I mean, if it's a story about me, I may not have made that available, but it is publicly available information because it's printed in Vermont Digger.
Right.
The latter half of that, I believe, was not our suggestion, but based on my conversations with Mr. Curtis, believe the intent was to prohibit companies that may scrape social media sites, for example, and if I posted a picture and my driver's license on the table, that would not be deemed as publicly
Okay.
available information.
Okay.
And the intent is to protect against entities that might scrape that information and then use that for
So they find some
other
back
purposes.
door for finding data that wasn't otherwise you believe to be public information.
And that's helpful, and it would need to, and presumably that specific instance would be captured by this, it would have to be something sensitive data that isn't available through these other methods, A, B, because if you met A or B, then you're in the publicly available information category, so it's only within this limited other context.
And for a commercial purpose, which is another valuable caveat if they're trying to sell that data.
Just for clarity, we have seen publicly available information published for tax returns of a politician, published in the New York Times, very widely distributed throughout the news media. This term lawfully made available in distributed news media, did that include that kind of information, or would it still be excluded?
So that would be publicly available information, that is, if the news media lawfully made it available,
If it were stolen,
So I
without the
think,
consumer's
But-
consent,
The Pentagon
and then
Papers.
precisely the Pentagon Papers, Donald Trump's tax return, so I mean, it goes
What's
on.
in public, it's public.
It's public at that point, and you would be able to distribute.
the way that I read it is that the lawfully made available refers to the entity making it available.
Mhm.
Like if you.
Yeah.
You stole documents, you went in at night and put those documents on someone's desk table at a media organization, and then they had this. I mean, I don't know the ways in which media typically
Mhm.
works, if they have certain controls in place to avoid this, but I take that to attach to the entity making it available. I would call out, this is very similar to what other states do, but is actually in some ways narrower. This lawfully made available through distributed news media, because what some other states do is they say lawfully made available through these government records or widely distributed media, regardless of whether it's news media. And so there's some slight difference, but if this is what the parties are comfortable with, it is a nice way to call out additional categories of information that are already publicly available.
Right, and we're also gonna hear from the news media a lot.
TikTok. I mean, things arrive on the internet, and that, who's got a newspaper anymore?
I do, I love the newspaper.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry.
I
I'm a
read
whole
mine is
reader.
now online because they had to mail it, which meant it got there 4 days later. Cause I went to Bridgeport, came back, it wasn't news, so
Sorry.
I get the paper
It's just
online now, things, you know, something's hit the media, the internet, and it's definitely publicly available. I don't know if that's lawfully publicly available.
That would be with your consent, wouldn't you think?
So you would just ask
I'll
if
have to remind him.
it doesn't fit conceivably into the earlier two categories, those government records or news media, which is, I think, the essence you're talking about, is not picked up by ARB. It's then the controller has to make a determination themselves, and we have some mental state here to say, if they have a reasonable basis, and you might, you could spell out what a reasonable basis would be, like the breadth of its access, the fact that security protocols are in place for that kind of information. So you could try to build out more what that reasonable basis would be, but if you're talking about entities that or actions that don't fit into A or B, we're now getting into an area where we're asking the controller to make that determination and saying, as long as they have a reasonable basis to believe that the consumer themselves made it lawfully available, then that would be publicly available information. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
We can
in some
noodle
ways
on it.
it feels like closing the barn door after the horse is out.
Yeah, I mean, you could,
And then someone could be at risk of legal action against them if that's the case.
Yes.
Which this satisfies the groups that lawfully obtain public information to help with data related financial information. And so like
Right.
that's who we're trying to protect in this. If someone's a bad actor, they're a bad actor.
Right.
another thing that we haven't,
Lawfully obtain my information. It's.
Yeah, but it's not been
lawful for
publicly made available.
them, But they could.
No, Peter would have to be interested.
so we may be talking about different things kind of outside the
Okay.
scope of this, because
Yeah,
at some
let's-
point, we're getting into like criminal behaviors outside the
Okay.
kind
That
of.
is criminal,
Exactly.
sharing private information.
But one thing I did want to say on this one is, one thing we have not really articulated is animating goals writ large for the bill, which is maybe not something we need to do at this point, like maybe on the final day, like
Well, I think we need to be clear on our goals.
the reason I bring this up is that if part of what goes into this determination of what publicly available information is matters, because if you're saying generally what you're trying to do is protect folks' privacy, but in fact you're limiting the spread of information that is publicly available, that kind of belies the purpose, right? Because they don't have a privacy expectation for information that's publicly available.
Right.
So having a purpose in mind is helpful for trying to read in scope for these.
Okay.
Although I think the American consumer is surprisingly naive. I mean, I'm naive, but I think that they think that everything they share on Facebook is somehow private. I mean, I think the American public is having a big awakening that that what they share privately.
Millennials and beyond were taught in college
Okay,
not to
so-
put anything on the internet
Right.
that you don't want your grandmother to see or to be on the front page of the
Exactly.
paper the next day. So
But who took that advice? Not enough people.
yeah, there are
Apparently
not
now
smoke
we
or
talk-
seatbelt.
Sure,
Nobody-
millennials and I got the memo, I will say.
But nobody's teaching people who use TikTok that.
Well, they all have this, I mean, you know,
Well, that's
whether
why we
it
have
goes.
kids.
Our
code,
kids got
because they're
this,
not
my kids
doing
are
it.
very clear on this.
Yeah.
So whatever, I don't know
Yeah.
about purpose language, like this, whatever.
We should,
If we had time, I think
Yeah,
that would be
Yeah,
great.
I can't.
The reason I call it is just, it
If
could
someone
inform,
wants to.
yeah, how you think about publicly available information, and it may be that at the final stage of this bill,
Mhm.
findings or things may be added.
So it sounds like you're volunteering to work on that.
Because
I'm
I'm the
not.
purpose,
Yeah.
if we have time, I mean, I can't do it in an hour.
It's not
No,
today, it's
not today. It would
Okay.
be in our final, whatever happens with this bill.
Sure.
Okay.
I think working on a purpose would be great. I'd be happy to join.
Alright.
Cause there's a lot out there.
And obviously talk to the house. Okay.
All right, let's jump to 12, so the next page. We're looking at the sale of personal data. This previously said that sale of personal data was the exchange of a consumer's personal data by the controller to a third party for monetary or other valuable consideration or for commercial purposes, and then it had a list of what commercial purposes would be. That commercial purposes section was meant to get at non-monetary considerations like leasing or trying to attract business through the exchange of information. What's been done here is removing that commercial purposes language, and this aligns the definition of sale of personal data much more with how other states approach this. So that commercial purposes piece was a step taken beyond what's normally done, and that has now been removed. So it's now back to where we started, exchange of consumers' personal data to a third party for monetary or other valuable consideration.
So, and I will just say, for most changes, I asked John to put us back in line with other states.
So is that putting us back in line with Connecticut?
Yes.
Yes, mostly, yeah, because so many people said, no, this is what other states do, and then someone else would say, no, this is new. And if people wanna have further conversation about it, we can, but I needed to see what other states do. Because adding a whole new second definition of what personal data is for sale that has oral discussion was too much for us for the purposes of getting this bill out into the healthcare community.
So the question I have is this better? Is it more protective of consumers or less protective of?
This is less protective of consumers.
But
But it
clearer
is-
for people to understand what they're.
Yeah, but I would
It
just
is
like,
clearer.
why is it less protective?
Because previously, so what you have now is exchange for monetary or other valuable consideration. So that's something where people will look to an assignable value that was received for that. And the reason that commercial purposes, the language that's now been struck, was added was to try to contemplate non-monetary or harder to capture instances in which a controller may be gaining a benefit from releasing that information to another party, but it's not easily put into economic terms. That was the idea behind the commercial purposes. So if the commercial purposes is meant to be more consumer protective, but it is also true that it is less clear what would be picked up. And when we first discussed this in House Commerce, it was actually unclear to me how other valuable consideration wouldn't already pick up commercial purposes, but the fact that there had been discussions in other states that did not elect to do this, but there had been discussions about adding that commercial purposes was the reason we ended up adding it. It was like, oh, to make clear that to the extent, like to deem, if controller is doing this other kind of activity, gaining a benefit, but it's not necessarily economic or has immediate economic consequences, that it would be captured by this concept. So
The metric I'm using is, can we go to the floor and explain how that would work? And I was not confident that we could go to the floor when other states have a different definition that they've litigated and had on the books and have a new definition and we couldn't tell the retailers how that would work. Couldn't tell anybody what that meant. And that's not responsible for us to do it there.
So again, this is something that possibly could be fine and added for the future, but this is just about, this is a huge foundation upon which we can build and improve as time goes on.
Right, I don't want, if there's a lot of things in here you might say, is this more or less protective of consumers? I don't think we can answer that well if we don't know how it would work.
Yeah, that's the next step, but it's just a framework.
So
Okay,
I think what you're seeing is in other states, and if anybody outside of committee wants to look back at why they put that in and talk to the House, we can do that for a potential conference committee. but we
Right.
do need to get this bill
Yeah,
moving to its other committees of
And
jurisdiction.
you should just keep a running list of things to address in phase two.
I just wanna let you know we're in the process. You can do some personal.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cause if we do have a conference committee, we'll be running out of people to be at that conference committee, so start doing your homework now.
I think they're.
Okay, let's go to page 14. Modifying the definition of targeted advertising. This is very similar to what we just discussed, so this is aligning with what we would see in Connecticut or other states. Previously, we had the prior draft had a bifurcated definition of targeted advertising that had different restrictions for targeted ads for minors and targeted ads generally. And in both instances, it contemplated that activities across even affiliated websites, ads based on that activity would be targeted advertising. This returns to what's done in Connecticut and says it's only displaying an ad to a consumer where the advertisement is selected based on personal data obtained or inferred from their activities over time across non-affiliated websites. So it's not going to pick up activity on affiliated websites anymore. It's just going to be non-affiliated and remove the distinction between minors and general consumers. For minors, we previously had a really severe definition of targeted advertising that prohibited even first-party targeted advertising. So the activities of a minor on that website, even ads based on their conduct on that website would have been prohibited. So those have both been removed, and this now matches what you see in other states.
So it matches mostly Connecticut.
This won't stop me if I buy something online, getting advertisements from the company I bought things online from.
No.
So I'll still know when what I want goes on sale.
That's right. I would also just say, even if you had the other concept, you could always elect to receive targeted advertising, but that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So do you have to opt into this?
No, and we'll come to that piece later because there was a concern you'll recall from testimony last
No,
week about.
absolutely.
So we'll get to that. Jumping down to 16, we're at the thresholds section, page 16. On line 6, you'll recall that the subdivisions 1 and 2, which call out the particular numerical thresholds of consumers whose data is being processed to kick a person into the restrictions of this act. The second piece had this high gross revenue threshold of 50%. We've removed the numerical threshold, so a company that processes any number of, a person that processes any number of customers, but is deriving at least 50%. Sorry, more than 50% of their gross revenue. So that's a company that's making their business from the sale of personal data. No numerical threshold for those folks.
And just remind us, what was the numerical threshold?
I believe it was 15,000.
That's
last.
Because we added that.
I made this change because I felt like it was starting to become arbitrary, I think.
Well, some of it all is arbitrary.
Yes, so.
This is also good too.
I thought we had the data, Experian and the credit, all those things, the credit reporting and I was told by the Attorney General that we had an agreed language. Is this reflective of
We
that?
have the exemptions for credit reporting pieces, if that's what you're
Okay,
asking about.
and that existed before.
That's existed, yeah, that's not new. Yep.
Well, it was the last section that we never moved on, so.
Sure. Oh, you're talking about
This-
data brokers.
Yes.
We'll get to
The
data.
House had heard our discussion about 25K and then 15
Right.
plus 50%, but to me, this is actually more of a concession to their position that either 25,000 or the basis of your business is the sale of person.
And that's really what we try to
Period. You could be doing it for 25.
When we think of goals, that's one of our chief goals,
Right.
so that supports.
So this has been contemplated,
What about the politicians that value
their lists.
their lists?
Yeah, that's, so
Personal
John
data,
believes
that's-
that's included.
Yeah, I think they're captured. They're not exempt. I don't believe that they're exempt. The next sheet, sorry.
Mailing list this year.
Yeah, well,
And there were federal requirements for that too, for federal campaign.
Jumping to line 8, this is just a cleanup change. You'll see sections 24, 23, and 24, 24 of the prior draft.
sorry, are we still on page 15?
Yep. Still, sorry, 16.
Okay.
Page 16. We're still on 16. You'll recall that we had data protection assessment sections. Those were 24-23 and 24-24 in the previous draft. Those have been removed in this draft. There are no more data protection assessments. And so when you see a highlight like this on line 8, you're seeing a highlighted update to a cross-reference. That's all that this is. It's so just a cleanup change there resulting from removal of the DPA sections.
So is that our conversation on the removal of the data protection assessment?
Or
we'll have it some more time?
I mean, from what I recall, the AG said she didn't think it was necessary. It's a really big burden.
Okay.
If you wanna ask.
No, that's okay. That's,
Well,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
gonna have,
I
Where'd you
don't know,
go?
we lost.
we're gonna have.
But the actual AG.
We're gonna
is
have the
coming in.
AG, so if you,
You can ask that,
And-
yeah.
No, if that's what she said,
well,
But you can double check if you want.
okay,
I don't, you know,
okay.
I just think it's too big of a burden to ask every single business in the state right now. With the AG
Yeah,
saying
no, I
it
don't wanna
doesn't
ask
have value.
every, yeah.
Next, we're in the exemption section. So if we jump down to page 19. We're going to line 11. The highlights here, just to call out what this is doing. Previously, the family educational, FERPA was addressed as part of this data level exemption at subdivision 11. That has been removed and replaced with an entity level exemption, which is below.
so a long list of exempted entities.
What you're looking at there is the data level exemption. The highlights there are just to reflect that this previously was a FERPA data level exemption, and we'll come to it. We're not there yet, but it's been changed into an entity level exemption.
This was a higher ed request. That
This was a who request,
higher education.
right? Remind me, for family
Well, it'll show up on page 21.
okay,
We'll get to it. There is a change before that, that I did want to address. So this on page 20, top of page 20 on line 2. This is a request from the AG to add data subject to the Grand Leaf Flyway Act, which again is your financial regulations, federal law.
right.
I don't think this is necessary. We already have a call-out that is meant to be narrowly crafted to target GLBA. We have non-public personal information that is processed by a financial institution.
Was this in Chris's memo?
So this was,
Yeah.
I was confused by this request because I think this broadens the exemption in a way that's unnecessary. The House drafted this GLBA data level exemption to be specific to the GLBA defined terms, which are non-public personal information in financial institutions. These pull in federal definitions, and so adding more data does broaden this exemption, meaning less fall subject to the act. But it may be worth-
I'm okay with that. I mean, we can talk to the AG
Yeah,
about
we're
it.
gonna-
But I think let's just leave this alone because a lot of people have come to us and said, we don't know what data is subject to GLBA or not, you know, like I think this is a fair change. But it sounds like was responding to them hearing a lot of the business contribution.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be easier to look at it and just say, oh, any data that's subject to GLBA, but not
It
public
has
personal.
consequences.
Yeah, and non-public personal information is the recognized term under the GLBA.
You mean broadening it.
Mhm.
Right.
Oh, I see. Data just kind of builds on.
Exactly. So, and in fact, you wouldn't need references to non-public personal information processed by a financial institution if you just say data subject to the GLBA,
Right.
because that is data subject to the GLBA.
Interesting.
So.
What
definitely-
do you recommend?
Yeah,
Well,
I
it
would choose
depends
one or
on
the
what,
other then.
so exactly, if what you guys want is a broader exemption, I would just say data subject to the GLBA. If you want the narrowly crafted exemption that is tied to GLBA recognized terms,
I
I
say
would
let's
stick
do
with.
data. Allison?
Yeah, I wish I understood it more fully, but it broader would just be data. And so we'd be getting rid of the financial institution or,
You'd be getting rid of non-public personal information that's processed by a financial institution because that is data.
right,
So it would be, that's data that's subject to the GLBA, so you would just say data subject to the
so let's
GLBA.
just do data.
To make clear, this broadens the exemption,
Mhm.
meaning less is subject to the protections of the act. That,
Oh, making fewer subject.
Exactly, by broadening an exception, you shrink the coverage of the act.
But we are saying that in this situation, the GLBA carries. And so we might as well, if data is subject to the GLBA, it does have another oversight entity.
Totally, I mean, that's right, the downside to opting to data is that the non-public personal information is crafted just to talk about what kind of information GLBA is concerned with.
I think just saying data gives room for movement on data privacy at the federal level that we're not contemplating right now. And I just want people to know Welch's office is optimistic that something will happen at the federal level, but they don't feel they can comment in any more detail at this time. And optimism is still has a long timeline in Washington, so.
This is terrible. I mean, I this is not my wheelhouse particularly, but certainly we want to protect. I mean, I understand that there may be.
I mean, now it says or data.
Certainly we want to protect the non-public personal information.
Right, but now it says non-public personal information or data. The data subsumes the non-public personal information. You don't need both.
But what else is included in data that's not non-public personal
Well,
information?
so to call it the narrowing function, it is, the narrowing is, it's only data that's subject to the GLBA. So the idea behind it is that you're calling out information that is independently regulated under GLBA. Like that's the idea behind why it's okay to exempt this category. I was just trying to call out why you might have technical terms like non-public personal information processed by a financial institution as opposed to a broad category data. But it's correct that in both cases, you're saying it is something subject to the GLBA.
Right.
So both would be protected.
If we left it alone, I mean, but
No,
data,
it would be exempt.
Exempt. We're talking about exemptions.
Protected.
This is all exemption.
both would be exempt from our state policy because it's federally regulated. And
Subject to the GLBA.
right. And people have come in and said, we're subject to the GLBA. We're not sure what counts as public or non-public. I think it just makes it clear to say data. I'm not saying it's better or worse, I'm saying it's clarifying to say data subject to.
Okay,
Because
It's all exempt, but the purpose of that act isn't public accessibility. I mean, that's probably.
Sorry, I think we're
it's
so
not, it's
the-
privacy.
the non-public personal information is a defined term in GLBA. So this is not a dispute about
Right.
publicity or things on that front. It's just
Yeah,
that's a recognized term in the GLBA context. And the
Yeah.
question is whether you're using the recognized term from GLBA or you're just using a broader category.
We have a lot more sections, so
yeah, I like.
just going
specificity.
around, if we're gonna get consensus,
I like the specificity of it. I would not change it to data.
One question. Setting aside the definition that's in GLBA, is there in generic terms, non-public personal information that could be processed by a financial institution that would not be subject? In other words, I skip the definition in it, but I'm talking about
Right.
as we speak about what's non-public public information.
Quick answer is I don't know because I don't know the GLBA. But I think the answer is probably not because these are terms tied together within the GLBA. So maybe that's as far as I'm willing to go with it. I don't, there's a reason that it's drafted the way that it was, that it is called out this category in GLBA terms processed by this institution subject to GLBA. But if you could have non-public personal information processed by those institutions that falls outside of GLBA, I don't think so. But yeah, I'm sorry. I
Christmas card list that a bank uses, for example.
I don't think that's, this sounds like a question as to what non-public personal information is, which I can't.
Yeah, in other words, do financial institutions process personal information that's in effect proprietary to them that is outside of this federal law? That's really what I'm asking.
I don't know the answer to that, yeah.
but what you are saying is that data, all data, that non-public personal information that's part of all data. So all data would include
Yes,
Mhm.
the question,
specific,
the question here is whether you want one or the other. It's
Yeah.
not whether you want
Yes.
both.
so can we make them two separate?
No, you don't
No.
need, you don't need two separate.
Okay.
Randy, where are you?
Indifferent.
Indifferent, one for data. I mean, one for non-public, I'm for data, Allison.
I think my understanding is I would go with data. Just because if that includes non-public personal, so that, which is what I'm understanding in this brief conversation,
Mm.
then I would be fine if it says data because it
Mhm.
assumes the beginning.
Yes,
Right, but that we're
And
making
clearer.
the exemption larger.
yes,
Right.
Exactly.
because
Which
it's
is
subject
the
to
problem
it.
if you're trying to protect.
Right,
Right, so that's why I like it,
Right.
being more specific.
And that's why you're wanting to keep it more specific. So it's a tear. And I don't understand that it's fully the like pricing. Yes or no?
Data is, I guess data is.
that,
So is it that?
Yeah, and we can
Yeah,
think about this.
Mhm.
I just, that's a big
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
I will note to myself, looks like data and here. Jumping to 21, this, now a few minutes away from, we just talked about this, but I mentioned above that data level extension for FERPA had been removed. This is what replaced it. If you look on line 3, subdivision 19, an educational institution subject to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and regulations adopted to implement that act. So now we have a entity level exemption. So those institutions have comfort that they are not subject to the act, this act, assuming they are subject to FERPA, and they don't have to ask whether they're processing that information in a particular way. Any violations they have in FERPA are dealt with by FERPA and not by Vermont. That's the result of this change.
Okay, so this is what UVM and other.
UVM National Student Clearinghouse.
What about VSAC?
I think this is protective of how they share information to know their rankings and understand, their mix of aid. So we can ask UVM or National Student Clearinghouse if they want to testify this morning.
I'd like to hear from VSAC. I mean, they get data from high schools, they get.
They'd be included in this.
They may or may not. With VSAC, what didn't come in and talk, I was talking about institution.
I don't even know if they know this is.
They're a lending institution, not a
Yeah.
higher ed institution. This was for higher ed. I don't know if I don't know if they count as an educational institution. They're not. So this is just for educational institutions.
So the National Student Clearinghouse, isn't that like advertising? Or
No,
That's different than this, and
yeah, that's not for
we'll come to that in a
advertising.
data book or so.
Okay,
So we don't need another witness. This is just for our higher ed folks. That's what I'm hearing.
like actual schools.
Yes, UVM brought this to our attention because their data partner brought this to their attention. I don't think the other higher ed institutions have like a,
And it's not high
Obvious,
schools, it's not individual, it's not lower level schools.
no,
Well, VSAC then is not an educational
Exactly.
institution by definition.
No.
right.
Uh,
They have other things they fall under. Okay,
Shall we continue on?
yes.
Let's jump down to page, oh, sorry.
Wait, we're still on page
Yes,
20.
I'm sorry, yes. On line 10, we have new subdivision 21. This is a data level exemption for personal data of healthcare service volunteers held by nonprofit organizations to facilitate provision of healthcare services. So this is for nonprofits that are holding that information to facilitate, linking up folks, volunteers with provision of medical services.
To deliver vaccines, et cetera. I'm gonna for the sake of time, we're not spending too much time on this. This is for health and welfare to discuss, and I'll point this out to Ginny, but the healthcare folks asked for this because.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
For obvious reasons, right? You can think of all
Right,
sorts of
yes,
reasons.
yeah, so
Quite honestly.
we just tried to honor that in its fullest, and then Ginny can understand it for she wants.
We can jump to page 24. This is just a cleanup change on line 13. So this is a mistake from the prior draft. We had updated the response period to 60 days. And I caught that in subdivision B, this needs to be updated. So this is just a cleanup change to match what was accepted in the previous draft. Not meant to be a meaningful change there. We can go to page 27. So now we're talking about data minimization. So this was a big piece that has come up.
Big.
And so,
piece of-
yep. So the language that you're gonna see here is similar to, it's slightly different than Connecticut, but it is what was proposed with specifically in mind the targeted advertising piece. So this addresses the concern that the previous draft required opt-in for targeted advertising. That should not be the case under this new concept. This was language proposed by,
So this is getting rid of the opt-in.
This is getting rid of what they perceive as an additional pop-up, because at time of sale or at other points in the existing user experience, it asks, do you want emails and updates, or you bought this pair of socks and now we're gonna try to sell you a bow tie or whatever. It's irritating, but our small businesses are saying they would lose that capacity against Amazon, which has a blanket consent to target your very specific wishes and desires. Our retailers have websites that weren't designed by the best of the best necessarily, and to comply with this, they'd have to make the user experience more like, no one likes those pop-ups either, you know, so those are probably the most annoying to people, is a pop-up on every page telling you, like, do you consent to, you know, have this exchange with us?
We did have one proposal asking, I know when you haven't finished presenting it, and I apologize. I apologize, but I feel like we had this conversation with Jim Hall, that
That's
the
exactly where
retailers
it
were
comes from.
asking for this consent happening at the checkout.
Yes, which it does. So, did you look like you wanna say something, but this is
So
suggested
this is putting
directly
those
from,
conversations.
basically, our retailers and online folks said, if you do this, you'll be out of line with other states that already have us complying with data privacy and data minimization. But they already have language that covers it without us having to do something new in the user experience. That probably doesn't make the user happy either.
Erin Segrist, president of Vermont Retailing Grocers Association. It adds an extra layer of inconvenience to consumers, right? Consumers want streamlined, quick access. And usually when you hit purchase, that means that you're consenting to them collecting a card for your purchase. But now it would add a second or third click on top of that, which usually if people have to click extra, you know, it deters them from following through with making the purchase.
Yeah, I have a question about this because I looked at some sites. So what would this extra click entail? What would be
It
the
would be a
message?
pop-up saying, we are collecting your information, your credit card information to complete the sale, or
we see that you like our product, but like,
Well, wait a minute. So that's what it would say? It wouldn't require, I thought it would just say if the retailer was going to collect their information for advertising purposes, they would need a pop-up. But to actually complete
Whatever-
the sale,
right, whatever information you're collecting, you would have to have an extra click, whether it's a pop-up or like purchase and then another like confirm. Right? So you're requiring the customer to click more than they are expecting to.
to confirm a sale,
So
Processing the data.
processing the credit card data, basically is what, or whatever kind of.
Whatever they're collecting.
So
Yeah, see, I get those all the time.
so
And
at checkout, you mean, cause I only wanted a checkout, you know, you give your information and then I don't mind another thing that says confirm it.
but it's also where they say, can we send you our newsletter and like
Oh, I
update you on
hate that.
deals? And you can say yes or no.
okay, but they say that often at the beginning, when you just enter the website, and that's their choice.
Yes,
So
that's
it
what this
doesn't
is
seem
trying
to be. I don't find that a compelling argument because I see a lot of those pop-ups that are the choice of the retailer.
they are trying to give you choice. I mean,
No,
they're
but they're at the beginning of the
usually it's in the-
experience rather than. the
What does that
end.
usually say?
It says, hey, sign up for
For
our
email.
newsletter and
Yeah.
you'll get
So they're
discounts."
trying to get your consent.
No, they're just trying to get me on their list.
They're already on their
That you
list.
have to
They're
consent.
already on your list.
Right,
It's an opt-in.
right,
Yeah.
but that's at the beginning of the experience, and they choose that. Having something at the end of the experience, I'm gonna be a lot more likely to finish the sale if the.
So what
if
they
it's
were
at the
saying
end.
is, you could, if you buy a pair of socks, this was the guy who said, if you buy a pair of socks, they can't advertise you bow ties, because that wasn't material to the sale, which was more specific language that doesn't exist in other states.
I don't see that connection because they can still do that and and I see them voluntarily.
Well,
doing
do
that.
you remember the other language and what you liked about it?
I think
No.
it may be
Okay.
helpful if I direct us to what the language change
Yeah.
is.
Okay,
Sorry,
that's
I
Yeah.
apologize, because I kind of derailed.
So-
And I
We can take maybe 5 more minutes on this just to keep us moving.
So previously, this was process personal data only as reasonably necessary and proportionate to provide the services for which it's collected. So that was the key part of the language that folks were objecting to. There's other things that you can process personal data for. You can do for another disclosed purpose compatible with that context, or you can obtain consent. The idea was that targeted advertising or the like would not be something for the provided service and wouldn't necessarily, but could be, but wouldn't necessarily be safely in category B, compatible with the context in which that personal data was collected. Therefore, to the extent folks wanted to do targeted advertising, they would need to obtain consumer consent. So that's where this change comes from, is changing from to achieve those services for which the data is collected and moving to as reasonably necessary and proportionate to achieve a disclosed purpose, which will be in that data privacy notice for which the personal data was collected. So this provides more comfort that those ads, and it's clear that the bill contemplates an opt-out regime for targeted ads, so that is correct. That they will not need to look to bucket 2 and wonder if they fit into bucket 2. They're safely within bucket A and therefore don't need to do this opt-in.
Senator Cummings.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see this as a lot of work for me. Opting in and opting out. Right now, I book a flight on Expedia. I get out of there, I get a pop-up. Would you also think about booking a motel or,
Yeah.
a car? Am I gonna have to opt out to say, I don't wanna know about your motel? Or maybe I'm just thinking flights and it's a good reminder?
Yeah, I mean, so this is helping King Arthur Flower, Orvis, Vermont Country Store. This is what they were saying. We
Yes.
already comply with other data privacy laws. I am saying we're not pushing them into a new frontier
Yes.
where they're the target of action in Vermont businesses, without knowing what it does. So people outside of committee can look at it again and look at the other language and talk to the House, but at this point, I can't tell our online retailers that have Nexus in Vermont that I know what this will do to them and what kind of concerns it raises for them. So I'm erring on the side of do no harm.
So at the moment, it requires an opt-in in the bill, is that correct?
It
Is that
We took
correct?
that
No.
away. We changed,
No.
right?
It allows targeted advertising, much like we understand it now, because you clicked on Vermont Country Store's link on Facebook, and then you might not have made a purchase, but they have some data that you're interested in. So,
I got something like, are you still interested in this?
Exactly.
We've marked it down.
yeah,
Right, so this
That will be
would
permanent.
reduce that.
I
If-
don't want to
if-
reduce that.
You want to get all those ads.
what
It
there's,
isn't all those ads unless I do.
what our small business community is saying is they would suffer the most if we changed the existing little colloquial ways online that you can do targeted advertising. The huge companies that know, as a busy mom, that I want paper towels every 2 months, are not impacted by this. Who is impacted are our local hotels, our local businesses who want to comply, but they want to follow customers like you used to in the old days. They want to say, they walk by my store every day and they look at the dress in the window, and I want to be able to talk to them about it. This is giving them a level playing field, and we have 2 more minutes to discuss it.
And Amazon never sends me an ad about paper towels.
Exactly. They are like.
They never send me an ad.
I would hope you'd be going to your local store and buying all of this locally.
And to be clear, even as, sorry.
Yeah,
Even as passed by the House, that targeted ads would require opt-in was an unintended consequence. That was not a deliberate choice. The bill clearly contemplates that you can opt out of targeted advertising. So that was an unintended consequences from the narrowing language of service provider.
again, we have a whole
That's
nother case of
interesting. All right.
Any work on
yeah.
these will have to happen outside of committee.
Yeah, I like opt-ins just generally.
So if we jump down to page 28, this is just setting or reinserting data from the language that we dropped in the previous draft. That was done unnecessarily. I don't know that I need to go into much detail about this. It was dropped in the previous draft, I think, under a misunderstanding of what the problem was. So this is just reinserting the earlier data minimization language to ensure that any processing of personal data is reasonably necessary proportionate to that purpose. But this is just cleaning up duties in the other piece of the data minimization as well. On 29, you're just going to see some renumbering, so there's no substantive change to these pieces. 30 does have a substantive change on page 30. If you look starting on line 7, this is calling out that a controller is not prohibited from offering loyalty programs. That's your subdivision 2 on line 11. But we previously had in the last draft language to say that data could only be transferred to third parties if certain conditions were met, including that consent would need to be obtained. That was something where the House's proposed version of the bill was in advance of other states. So the language change here is just to return to what other states are doing and remove those extra conditions for transfers of data.
Sorry, we're on page 47 now.
No,
30.
Oh, okay, I thought, okay.
Okay.
Talking about loyalty programs.
Oh, we haven't got to all these cross-reference housekeeping.
Yep.
Okay.
So these are loyalty programs.
Loyalty programs, in the last draft, we had stricter language in Vermont to call out that if a loyalty program was going to transfer data to third parties, that you would need consent, that it would be disclosed to the, obviously there could be.
Right, no, that's good,
They have consent.
because it's a loyalty program to that particular retailer or that particular establishment. We don't necessarily want to be loyal to everything.
No, but we are allowing them to transfer the data by making this change.
But I don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Why did they transfer the data?
Yeah, I mean, I
They sell
don't,
it.
if I'm loyal
It's
to one
valuable.
thing, I don't want to have.
It's valuable.
Aaron?
Erin Segrist, Vermont Retailing Grocers Association.
Sorry.
Many retailers partner with third-party companies to manage the data in a way that keeps the information.
That's different.
If you go to the grocery store and you use your loyalty programs, you're also, the loyalty program gives you money off of your gas. They have to be able to share that information with another company to provide you the discount.
And Marriott said this, like about,
Yeah.
you know, they don't, Hotel Vermont, they manage their own data, Marriott it's an opt-in
National
approach.
chain.
So this is not just selling it to some other company to make their database.
And this is already disclosed,
Retailers
actually.
have- Why would you sell rid of your competition?
No, you wouldn't, there's lots of other places to sell it.
Retailers want to ensure that they maintain a positive relationship with their customers. They have no interest in selling it to diminish that relationship. They are working with third-party managers to provide them the value of the loyalty program.
So I think Costco needs this, I think like Cumberland Farms, like
All of
Aldi,
the,
everything.
all of the large grocers.
I have no, I mean, those are all big, huge companies, so I don't have too much empathy for them.
Well,
But
we
I-
should for the consumer, but still,
We do have smaller
like
retailers.
they consent to this.
Aaron,
They
at
consent.
a future date, not now.
Yeah.
I would love to know, just as the Economic Development Committee, how many people actually take advantage of those additional offers? I have never bought gas as a result of Price Chopper offering me discount at a gas station.
Well, I did.
So,
Let's not even go there.
I know,
People are very price sensitive, inflation is high. We are not going to start to question Vermonters' decisions to save money.
In the future, I'd like to see how much people actually take advantage of
Yes.
those cross marketing.
Okay,
That-
we're gonna move
I
on
use
and
all the
pretty
time.
much,
What?
I
Cool.
bought my gas at Sunoco all the time when I had,
Good,
price
I'm
drop was
glad.
offering.
I'm now
We're
electric, so I don't buy gas, yes.
so the next whole section is we've taken out data assessments and we don't have to spend too much time on
Yeah,
it.
so I can just call those out, we don't have to look at them. 30, on page 34, updated cross references, similarly, page 37, these are flow through changes, they're not substantive that come from removal of the data protection assessment sections. Same thing on page 39. And same thing on page 40. Okay, where we come to the actual substantive changes, page 41.
Yeah.
It won't be visible, but it's what we've said, which is that sections 24, 23, 24, 24 of the previous draft have been removed. And those are your data protection assessments. So you guys have talked a little bit about that. I will leave that to you guys. But that's why you see highlighted here, for every section remaining, you're gonna see the section call out highlighted because it's updated.
You mean because it's newly numbered?
It's renumbered, exactly.
Because we've taken out,
Data,
Data protection assessments, which were previous drafts, sections 24, 23, and 24, 24.
okay, I mean, I'm sorry, but I need to understand,
we,
I need to understand
we
the
were gonna ask the
substantive reason.
AG.
Okay,
Because the AG said she didn't feel like she needed it and
This
it
is
was
her-
a burden that wasn't gonna help her with enforcement.
got it,
And
okay.
you can double check that with her, but I'm not gonna ask businesses to do something that that is very cumbersome for them to do and expensive. That the AG is saying she's not going to use in the course of her
Right.
work. That is another place where someone could receive legal action because they didn't follow some step in that data assessment. So as far as I'm concerned, out unless
Okay,
get further.
I thought her request, so I understand, is to take out section 24, 29.
Okay, but we'll get to that, but. Okay, we're moving to page 47.
So, bottom page 43, we do have one slight tweak. This is really just a
Okay.
clarifying change. This is your construction of duties section. There was a concern that, entities that are carrying out contract, processors that are acting on behalf of government entities may not be safe under this. This change just aligns the previous language here with, the exemption earlier in the bill. And so this is just clarifying language to make clear that if a processor is carrying out obligations with any of these entities under a contract that meets the standards of 2421, they're safe.
And do we do that for brokers too?
To the extent that a broker would fall into this, they're safe here. There's no similar piece in the data broker
I think we
section.
wanted that. I think it should harmonize.
I don't know that they have contracts with, I mean,
They aren't necessarily harmonizable.
I
I don't know that they have the same
contract
concerns
is
in
a good
place.
word, but they do fraud,
we-
it's
so
the
we,
fraud under a different,
we have that exemption.
That exemption.
Yeah, we have that.
okay, then we're fine. Okay.
Let's jump to 47. So. Previously, we had here, starting on line 6, the personal data processed by a controller, data controller may be processed to the extent, and this is for this is processing outside of the scope of the earlier sections. This is processing for internal purposes or that kind of ordinary course, on behalf of law enforcement. Like, we're talking about that kind of activity. For that personal data may be processed to the extent that the processing is reasonably necessary and proportionate to the purposes listed in the section and adequate relevant is necessary in relation to the specific purposes. We previously had a heightened A that called out for sensitive data. It would have to be strictly necessary for the purposes. That was removed both because it's a bit unclear what the relationship between reasonably necessary and strictly necessary would be. If something's necessary, it's necessary. So this is a clarifying change and also removes some concern that there might be unclear heightened practices for which someone could be getting this information. Okay.
So there's no rules that would be made after this bill. This doesn't go to rule.
I think the AG could make rules for fraud.
Oh,
AG
okay, okay, so
has
that's
rule
where
making
some of that specificity could come.
Yeah.
And-
Okay,
I'm gonna ask you to skip the PRA and do the rest, and then the PRA will be the last thing that would.
So we'll come back to 48. Yeah.
And 49.
Yeah, 49 is flow through from removal of data
Oh.
protection, so we don't have to look at that. We do need to go to 50.
As we get to 50,
This is gonna be changed. Yeah.
we can talk about it right now. If people saw the ADS memo, I think that helps us a lot. I wanna make sure that there's an existing AI committee that we created last biennium that lives in ADS, and they have a data privacy, they have like a data safety person in ADS. So we're gonna try and strike all of the pieces that put an oversight board under any other entity and expand that ADS board to be in charge of this. I just want it to have nexus somehow to the education and outreach, so we still have to.
Sure. So, I can
And
go
they're
into
coming
this. Yeah, but given that you're gonna
in.
change this, it sounds like, let me just call out things that may help you decide to do that instead of this.
Mhm.
There is limited, so this is setting up an oversight board. I've added some precautions here to situate this within the AG's office because there's some concern that an oversight board over a constitutional officer's
Yeah,
ability
it's
to
not
enforce the
fun.
law is
That's,
violating separation of powers. There are ways technically to do this. If you situate it within the office and you make clear that the AG's discretionary authority is not limited
Right.
by the board, then you could feasibly meet that concern, but it will definitely be,
I had
But
always
I'm-
wanted this to be advisory, but I think what makes sense is to move it to ADS, so I don't wanna
Sure.
belabor this too much.
right, and I think you're gonna hear from the AG.
But we're also gonna hear from ADS that they feel they have better capabilities to do this well. And I think we would agree because we don't want the AG to be,
Well, I don't think we're constitutionally able to have it.
well, it just doesn't make any sense, this was always a work in progress.
I think we're all agreeing.
Yeah, we're agreed,
So
so
she
let's
wants
move
to
on.
So what was 24, 29 is she was hoping to have?
24, 29 is multiple drafts ago, I think.
No, it wasn't, it's just last, right?
It's the last,
Last draft is Data Privacy Enforcement Oversight Board, which.
Yes,
Oh, okay,
just
yeah,
talk
Anna
yes.
has.
yeah,
So
sorry,
we're
the
changing,
renumbering, yes.
that's what we're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, that's
okay.
just moved to here.
Right, I mean, I
that'll
just
be-
know it's the big thing that stands out in her memo here.
No, and I'm
I know,
sorry,
but
just the
her-
renumbering.
you know,
Yeah.
Roger looking at the memo, that she could have helped us with how to bring in stakeholders over the last week. But not at 8:45 this morning, so we have a plan, we're gonna move on that plan.
So we'll go Back to
Well-
that.
ADS already had oversight on data.
That's right, they gave us a great suggestion, so we didn't have to keep working on this.
Right.
We might keep our stakeholder list right here and look at the existing AI task force or whatever it's called.
Do you serve on that, right? Do you serve on the AI task force? No.
I think you'll want to do that just
Yes.
to call out having an entire oversight board be composed of the regulated entities is.
Yeah, which is pretty awful.
It's dangerous.
But, and right now, I don't think there's any regulated entities on the AI board, which was a concern when we created that. So I just wanna see who's on that list
Sure.
and make sure that we have some representation.
So all of these, 1, 2, 3, 4 are all regulated entities.
They would be under this act, they would be subject to the Vermont Data, I mean, presumably they would be subject to the Vermont Data Privacy Act if they meet the thresholds. But the idea is that currently as structured, and it sounds like this is gonna change, but the oversight board is currently composed of entities that could have enforcement action against them.
That's,
But this is all changing is my thing.
okay, but who's changing it?
It sounds like ADS is.
Yeah, and we need to change it.
So we're gonna come back and look at a final draft.
So-
And this will be probably where we try to make the biggest changes to just make the existing AI task force, an AI and data task force. So I don't wanna talk about it now because it's all gonna change.
Let's jump to 52 then. This is your public education and outreach section. This has shifted away from the AG and ACCP carrying out these programs to the AG selecting a contractor pursuant to a competitive bidding process to design and implement that public education
And
outreach and assistance.
Was this
program.
part of Chris's memo?
This was not.
This is supporting, are they supportive of this? I mean,
that
because I
do not
thought
know.
they said they could do the education,
Yeah,
that they do it all the time.
They did. Why, what is this?
Why would
This
we
is
wanna spend all
because
that?
we heard educator, not enforcer.
And there was a concern about having the organization person who's going to enforce the law doing the
Right.
education.
And they're not, I mean,
That was.
education and outreach are different things. Saying, oh, here's some model language is really different than working with an immigrant business and a small business to comply. So if we want, this to me ties with the PR. I mean, everything was heightened because people didn't know how to comply. So if we have changed other language and we don't feel like we need a small business related program to help people with this, fine. We are just asking them to do a lot, and
Yeah.
that's gonna be hardest for our smallest businesses. And we're not having the AG's not gonna do that.
So it's outreach for compliance opportunities, which is, I think,
What we heard from Vermont Law and Graduate School,
Yeah.
even though they would be part of a competitive bidding process, is they would see $125,000 over 2 years being needed to do the outreach work.
Right.
I don't know if people want to put that in the bill.
I think let them choose the contractor and the LGS can apply.
No, not VLGS put them in the bill, but put in an appropriation in the bill.
We have a placeholder currently.
Yeah, we have a placeholder, but we have to decide on that.
Got it. And so we're looking at how many years you're suggesting that we finance that at 125 here.
I think 2 years makes sense. That's when the act takes effect, I think, at this point.
2 or 3. Yeah,
2 years.
it'll take a while.
But I think we're gonna we're gonna change this section, so it has nothing to do with the AG.
You don't even want the agent to select the contractor for
Well, that-
to a
Who's
competitive
gonna
bidding
do that? I
process?
mean, might as well have the AG
I
select.
think
that.
I
that
wasn't sure
you
what
should do it because they are in charge of implement of
I wanna
enforcement.
think more.
And otherwise, you have to
About
figure out
that.
who's gonna do it, and might as well be the AG. I think.
We're not making a final decision here.
Okay.
I wanna weigh other options.
Well, they have been the great champions of data privacy, so it makes some sense that they would. But anyway, so that would be, where is the appropriation in the,
If we scroll down, the language changes you otherwise see in the section are just to match that's above to call out is the contractor. The appropriation is below on it's on page 54, line 10. It's currently at
Oh, got it.
50,000.
Which wouldn't be far off for one fiscal year.
Yep, and that is just a single fiscal year, that's 2026 appropriation, but something if y'all want to change that.
I thought you just said we were looking at 125.
That was for 2 years.
125 for 2 years? That was 125 a year.
No,
Okay, sorry,
VLGS said 125 for 2 years.
got it. So,
And that's just one data point, but I think we should probably just leave the 50K alone. At this point.
All right, we can jump now to data brokers. That is the Vermont Data Privacy Act. So now we're on to data brokers. If we look on page 56, this is a slightly substantive but really clarifying change to align publicly available information for brokered personal information with the definition that's used above in the Vermont Data Privacy Act. So this is just making sure that those entities, the data brokers are, if they are transferring data or broker personal information, which is what kicks them into that category of being a data broker, if they're transferring it, but what they're transferring is just publicly available information that meets the definition we talked about above, that will not constitute BPI. So this is just an alignment piece really to ensure that DAI aligns with the Vermont Data Privacy Act. Publicly available information,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
And sorry, I should call out the reason for doing this. Aside from just harmonization purposes generally, there is a concern that in the absence of knowing what publicly available information would be in this context, now that we are not just subjecting data brokers to registration, but are additionally limiting certain ways in which they transfer data, for instance, allowing opt-out of sale, because transfer of data can trigger certain First Amendment restrictions. Having a sufficiently built-out concept of publicly available information ensures that you aren't accidentally limiting the transfer of information that's already out there and could trigger those heightened First Amendment concerns. So there is a substantive legal reason as well to align them. The next,
So. Alignment is good.
Yep.
Generally.
The next piece you see, this is really just a phenotype change to add in processors who are referenced in the act to the extent they are data brokers, they can be triggered here. I will call out, and I said this in House Commerce as well, I don't necessarily think you have to call out these entities because we call out commercial entities as a business. And the reason that business matters is that data brokers are businesses that do particular actions. So you're picking up at the definition of business entities that can fit the definition of data broker. And it provides some clarity that controllers, consumer health data controllers and processors can be data brokers. But they're likely to be commercial entities that fit into this last category anyway, but this was an AG request edit, so that's why this is put in here. And it's the same thing in the house when we were adding those pieces that was at AG request. The next piece is on page 58. So we're talking about sell or license, and the reason that sell or license matters is that's the kind of activity that triggers someone being a data broker. So this is excluding, so broadening what is exempted from the definition of seller license, a third category. So previously seller license didn't include incidental sales of data incidental to the business or done as part of transfer of assets, like mergers, bankruptcies, that would constitute seller license and make someone a data broker.
Right.
This adds now that disclosure of broker personal information that a consumer intentionally made available to the general public via a channel of mass media and did not restrict to a specific audience would also not constitute sell or license, meaning it would trigger someone into being a data broker on that basis, if that's the only kind of information that they dealt with. I will just say this, because brokered personal information, because brokered personal information excludes publicly available information, you're likely already satisfying this. However,
So this isn't really necessary.
there is some substantive change here. If you recall, publicly available information is information that is lawfully made available through government records or through distributed news media, or that a controller has a reasonable basis to believe the consumer has made readily available through widely distributed media, except for sensitive data. So there is an additional bucket of information that could be picked up here. A consumer could intentionally make something available via a channel of mass media and not restricted to a specific audience, and the controller not know that it was reasonably made available, but it's not a large change. I don't think you're hurting yourself by including this. I don't think you are severely altering the category of what data brokers would be by including this. But that's what it's trying to do, is make clear that seller license wouldn't pick up publicly available information that consumers are intentionally making available and not restricting to a particular audience.
Who's asking for this?
This was Mayor Brown, I believe, was the email that contained this. They had a memo on First Amendment pieces, which we just talked about some of the first.
This was a large legal firm who already enforces this in California. So
And that's-
they gave us California's language because California has the opt-out, or the delete act, but they took a very careful look at the delete act. And so I was glad that they gave us sort of how to align it with California.
And how, if we're trying to look at how we align with other states, how does this align with Connecticut?
So
They don't
Connecticut doesn't
have
have a data broker section, so California is one of the only places to look for this. I don't think this is a particularly dangerous provision to include if that's.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
I want to align us with other states, which is the biggest task we have. They already are following these other states. California is considered pretty strong on data privacy and how litigation unfolds. So, I thought it was helpful to be.
No, I'm just trying to understand how it got here and what it does.
And just to say, when we talk about seller license, we're just talking about the activity to trigger someone into being a data broker. So this is
Yes, I
also,
understand.
it also has a limited context in which it's applicable. This doesn't relate to, for instance, opting out of sale of data. This is not on that basis. This is just talking about what entities will be data brokers. And it's saying that an entity that exclusively, because if an entity did transfer data in other methods, they would still be a data broker. So the only instance in which this would really matter to someone, I think, is if an entity exclusively transferred broker personal information that met these sufficiently clear categories to make clear that the consumer was making it publicly available. So it really doesn't have a dramatic effect, is the other piece I would say.
Okay, so you think.
But I'm happy to talk more if you want to.
I think we're beginning to understand it. Thank you for your help.
No, for sure. I just want to make clear, this is not a broad concept of seller license that's relating to the opt-out provisions. This is just saying, what's a data broker? There's someone who sells or licenses particular information. What is sells or license? someone who transfers data, but it's not someone
But
who
it's not somebody who
transfers
transfers
DTI
yeah.
that's
Got
intentionally made available to the general public.
Yeah.
And so the only kind of person who would be removed from the pool of data brokers by adding this language would be an entity that exclusively discloses DPI that a consumer intentionally makes available to the general public via channel of mass media and does not restrict to specific content. That might reading.
That's a niche.
Yeah, as a strange.
But I mean, I don't wanna get too in the weeds, I think this has helped with like finding people who are part of the insurrection, I mean, you know, this is publicly disclosed.
Yes.
Imagery that is useful for
And we did
the
modify
public good.
the definition of publicly available information to align with VDPA on that basis as fit. That's one of the things as well. So
I do want us to get to the PRA, so we should.
Yep.
And I wanna get to the opt-out.
so 61, 62, we can that's just flow through changes. You don't need to see that. That's reflecting the addition of processor. But 72 is your opt out. Scroll down to that. Okay. So the change that you see here is that previously an individual could opt out of one of three things. They could opt out of collection of data, sell of data, or they could ask for that data to be deleted. We received in that same memo from Mayor Brown that the way that data brokers operate is that they're receiving information, which is a kind of collection, but the way that they work is they're just information is passing through them. And so the idea of having an opt-out from collection of data could mean that basically at any moment they are subjected to a violation of this particular section.
Even when the information is just flowing through them.
Exactly, and
the
yeah, so it could pose some enforcement, it could make them subject to litigation in ways that are maybe unintended, without knowing how data brokers actually operate. Because if they aren't out there actively scraping, but are instead receiving data,
Well, a nuclear power plant could make the thing, the water just flows through, well, it takes time and you do a lot of stuff to it, but the water is flowing through.
yep, so
However, it's heat, I mean, how long does it have to stop on the process of flowing through for it to have value?
Well, I
For
mean-
them to do stuff with it.
So the data broker is doing things with the, like, it just has to do more with how the information they receive is dealt with. If they aren't out there grabbing the information, but instead people are sending it to them for purposes. The idea is that telling individuals they can opt out of collection, one, they're gonna have to repeatedly do it, and the data brokers may not have the capacity to, this is
This is
just
to
me.
make it enforceable.
Yeah, this is-
Like, this is California language. Senator, I do want us to get to the PRA, so.
I'm just trying to figure out, is this where you can't say, I don't want you to report, I have a criminal record?
That is now exempt. You can't opt out of everything.
Yeah, that's just what I wanna make sure.
No, what I'm hearing is the brokers is receiving data, and some of that's gonna be an individual person's data, but that individual person can't say, you can't receive my data, but you can.
You can opt out of the things that matter to you, which is you can
Yeah.
stop the sale and you can have that data deleted.
Right.
Yeah, so the things that would matter, I shouldn't speak on behalf of all consumers, but the idea is that what would trigger heightened concern are these other pieces, and those remain opt-outable. Just this piece about collection to reflect the empirical reality of how data brokers operate, that piece has been removed. And to call out how the deletion works, we talked about this last time, but we have aligned with what's in the Vermont Data Privacy Act to say that those data brokers can retain a record of that deletion request, or they can opt them out of the processing. So
That's also aligning with California.
So then they do delete the data once it comes in. Once they have it, if you've requested to be deleted, then they do delete it.
They delete to the extent, so what they can, they don't have to delete
I mean,
everything.
they can't delete something before they've received it.
Right, and what they have to retain is a minimum level of data to let them know that they need to delete it, right? Because if they
Right.
deleted all consumer data, they would no longer know that they need in the future.
If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want them to minimize data,
Yeah.
then they don't have this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
information that you're now
No,
asking
no,
them to
I-
delete.
I think this one makes sense.
Okay, let's move on quickly because
Yep.
we do have a lot of, we're having two witnesses. to
I will,
vote.
if we jump to 76, we have a new exemption from the opt-out section, the data broker opt-out section. This is for a nonprofit organization that is established to provide enrollment data reporting services on behalf of.
And a UVM,
This is,
higher ed.
this is National Student Clearinghouse. This is for their, so someone who's established, a nonprofit established to provide degree verifications and the like to post-secondary schools. That's the idea behind this, so that they don't have to disrupt the way that they work. The last other change here is, I know we didn't talk about this last time, but this was an AG request, and I think this is likely to be dealt with elsewhere, judiciary probably.
I thought
it's
this
not already
was going
done
to
with it.
judiciary.
Yeah, so
I thought that memo from that young woman worker, that person.
The memo is going to judiciary. I think this bill now goes to judiciary and they can decide if we're ready to criminalize deepfakes.
Okay,
But this is the language.
my understanding was that from that memo we got the other day, or 2 days ago, whenever we got it, was that this was going to be added to the miscellaneous judiciary bill, and that this would not be in our bill, because it's not. It's
I
not
don't-
necessary for our bill.
We can ask judiciary if they're adding this. I didn't get confirmation.
yeah, I don't think we
I
have
think-
definitive. I think you're correct that the email said that's where they
That's my
imagined it would
understanding.
go.
But that's what they hope. I think it said hope.
I
I
think
don't know,
that's-
but I also think it's part of the objective, so that it doesn't bog this bill down with this.
So
criminal stuff.
that is worth saying, as long as you have this in there, this bill is likely to go to judiciary, so.
Right, but just to
Yeah.
preempt the need for that, given it has to go to health and welfare. And maybe when the.
We're
ETs
not, we're gonna get a few new pieces of language with John, so we're not voting today, so let me ask Magali to get
Ask.
confirmation.
Let's ask, yeah, we can do it maybe during lunch, but if we could ask if this section. That
Would
they're
you-
contemplating putting this into the miscellaneous.
Would you write their committee assistant and copy me and Senator Sears and say, we're trying to get clarity on this today? And could we have a conversation or could they just tell us?
Section 4.
Yes,
Yes,
it's the disclosure of
yeah.
sexually explicit images without consent.
It's
Page
the,
76.
it's the AG's recommended language on deep fakes.
Yeah, Senator Sears will already have the language.
Yes.
Right, and sorry, my understanding was this wasn't gonna be in our bill, but was gonna be in this.
There was nothing definitive. So I wanted us to look at it. And of course, if it's going somewhere else, the judiciary's bill, great. Okay.
Do we want to, you'll probably want, Michelle, if you want to talk too much about this, but do we want to jump to PRA at this
Yeah.
point? Yeah. So let's jump back to page 48. Is that believe where we go? I apologize to every viewer that experiences motion sickness with my page scroll. All right, so we are page 48, line 9. What we have here is removal of the called out private right of action. We do still retain the reference to consumer fraud protection in section 2453, which, as discussed last time, does contemplate private right of action there, but we no longer have our previous subsection A, which had a spelled out with different remedies, private right of action.
So I will say we have three choices on the table because I must not have made this clear, but our original Senate bill that we introduced on data privacy limited the right of action to the AG. It said the whole law is subject to the
Sole authority of,
Consumer Protection Act, but sole authority is given to the Attorney General. So we have kind of a strong poll we'll need to take about whether or not we want to leave the underlying private right of action alone in here, but not make it super big part of the bill language, or limit this to not having a PRA at all, or have the PRA with a lot of specific exemptions about who is subject to the PRA. Senator Cummings.
I think I remember the patent troll,
Mm-hmm.
and if we put a private right of action explicitly in here, to me, that's kind of a tie
Mm-hmm.
to anyone who might be inclined to do that kind of thing. This is highly complex, and I think we heard yesterday that the majority of businesses in the state have less than 50 employees or
Mhm.
50 employees and less. We're small businesses. And I don't want to hang them out as, you know. I assume if I'm agreed, I'm gonna call the Attorney General. The Attorney General can tell me, well, you know, it's not broad enough for us to take class action or something, but you have a right of private that it's there, but I don't, to hang it out and wave it,
So you want the whole bill subject to the private right of action, but it's underlying in the consumer protection.
Yeah, it's not called out here, it's existing in the underlying.
Okay, so Senator Clarkson, what do you?
So this is, sorry, because I introduced that bill, the data privacy bill.
Yeah.
And this is the language from that bill.
No, I sent that language to John in case he wants to pull it up.
How does this so
That gives sole authority
Sole
to
authority.
enforce to the AG.
So three, I can restate the three options. So one is, the version that we have is what Senator Cummings is describing. It doesn't call out an explicit PRA, but does hinge off of the existing consumer fraud protection, which prevents a PRA. Another approach is to say sole authority to the AG.
which is what was in our original data privacy.
That's what I'm
bill in
understanding.
the Senate, yes.
No PRA through section 2453, and the last is to have a PRA, and it sounds like introduce qualifiers, either harm thresholds or particular thresholds of entities that would be subject. So that's the three, as I understand.
At the moment, I support keeping the PRA in with those limits, with the cure, with raising the threshold. And I just think that if we take out it altogether, I'm not happy with this language. I would be happy with the, I'd be okay with the original language from the Senate bill. But I really would prefer, if possible, to keep the private right of action. Even if we, we create some bigger barriers. We already have a lot in law that makes it not possible for there to be frivolous lawsuits. This is not, I don't see this injuring small business as much as other people do, and I think it's I think we have protections already in law for this.
So I'm gonna, as we go around and it's my turn, I'm gonna put a fourth option on the table. That I think limits the rush of trolling that would occur, which is to make it the sole enforcement power of the AG for the first 3 years and then open up a PRA. Chair Marcotte already said he understood if we moved out the PRA till after the education and outreach is done, because I don't think it's fair to roll out the PRA at the same time that they're trying to learn what they do to comply.
You mean have, so that, I think that it.
But
makes sense.
I wanna bring back all the language that limits the PRA. Because.
It gets really complex.
Okay,
That's fair.
so we're at least pushing it out.
And when
People agree with
whenever
that.
it gets complex, you got loopholes.
I'm happy to push it out as long as it's.
If we push it out, we have to look at it again.
I would like it to be like other states. We've heard all our small businesses work across state lines. The more different we are, the harder complying is going to be, and the harder it is, the more you raise the chance that someone is going to inadvertently get, the out of line.
What I worry about, Senator Cummings, is if we just leave the underlying PRA, it opens up every business in the state that serves 25,000 people or more to PRA. So the businesses have an issue with the PRA as it came to us. So we don't have to decide on which option we take right now. I'd like our stakeholders to help weigh in before we make a final decision. But I'm weighing leaving the underlying PRA, which would then expose a lot of businesses to the PRA. And so I think we wanna push it out. We might wanna do other things. I had the PRA only applying to a business that 50% or more of its revenue comes from the sale or transfer of data, because that matches kids code. that the PRA essentially only applies to data brokers, not people who are considered controllers, who are generally small businesses and nonprofits who are generally relying.
Voter.
Well, anyone who's relying on
Telling yourself.
anyone who's
Yeah.
relying on the data privacy systems of a company, they're essentially paying to do the better job. If let's say one of those companies has a complaint against them, you could then bring in every business or nonprofit that uses them and has a controlling relationship with them, because they are now, we created a new definition of what a controller is.
I'm getting totally confused.
Really.
I would love to see what the disclaimer would look like for all of this, both for consumers, users of these systems. I think it's almost incomprehensible at this point. I strongly do not believe that this is the time to identify climate action. I think getting the privacy bill in the first place is the first step. And I think enforcement belongs to the government. I don't think it belongs to fraud lawyers. And that's exactly what we have the potential of having. So I think it would be, very harmful to small, medium-sized businesses that we talked about who get dragged into this morass of complexity.
So go back to the language in S269 that gives the AG.
So I give it to the AG and I wouldn't include private right of action there. I would
Okay.
give it to the AG and let government who have the staff and
Yeah.
competence to be able to do this kind of enforcement.
I agree with you.
So I'm on the balance of consumer versus business, I'm concerned about the consumer. I think a lot of businesses, I know a lot of businesses outsource IT. So there would be companies who would be adapting and changing their processes, and they already do that. I think a private right of action is important because I've heard, the AG, that's to me a good source on what works. So I would like it somewhere. I can see it put out a couple of years in order to flesh this out. But it is complicated, and that's one of the reasons that it's a problem, is that I feel like the public is getting taken advantage of because it is such a complicated area, but it's our job to protect the public. So I'm glad that we're doing this. And it's really critical that we understand all the harms, because it's not just ads, it's changing elections. There's real harms.
I just wanna say, we can always come back and say we need a PRA without putting in the bright lights for other lawyers. Oh, in 3 years, like, get your case ready, we can always come back and do a PRA if the AG says to us, there's harm occurring that she can't manage, that she's getting phone calls, that
I was thinking I'd do a delay if we put a sunset, which would force us to come back and have what has happened. Is there a big slippage that the AG can't handle? Is there an unmet need?
Well,
because I'm still not understanding harm.
Right.
That's what we haven't talked about.
We could ask the new AI and data task force to look at the private right of action and come back to us. Basically, you don't have anyone saying to us, if you don't do a private right of action, we know of harms that will occur that we can't.
We haven't discussed that.
What I've heard is those harms will continue to exist. That's the issue.
But I don't know if they exist now. That's what I'm having a problem with. I can see potential. But I don't see getting unsolicited ads, which I used to get through the mail ad infinitum, is a particular harm. And so it's hard to put a punishment with a harm I don't.
We haven't had the harm as fully illustrated as we.
I asked Chris Curtis to share, and he talked about the Experian case, which really would have business still has no impact on that case whatsoever. So I have asked for harm, and we don't have anyone bringing that in.
The data privacy with children, that's the.
And we have said you
Also,
can't even
haven't
sell
talked
children
about
data.
cost.
Right.
Because every time you add requirements and complexity to something, it adds a cost. And there's a cost that goes to business, it goes to everybody who's got to deal with this stuff. And that cost gets passed on. You just don't see it.
Oh, I know, right.
So there is a cost to consumers, and we haven't seen, any kind of projection as to what that might be.
Right. Well, there's also a cost when consumers distrust the system and
But
when,
businesses are saying,
well, but what
we want that
what
trust.
I understand is that when there's an opt-in, that consumers more easily give their data to the businesses, but because the businesses want the data and the data gets stale after a while too. It needs to be updated.
I had a conversation with Chris Curtis over the weekend where he said, I went to all of the websites of these big companies and they're all complying. They all have great data privacy policies. And I said, I know, Chris, what they're telling you is they do this well because it's good for business.
Right.
And you opening them up to the exposure of lawyers for no reason is what they are concerned about. They are doing this well and they know what they're doing. This guy's the head of the Catalog of Mail Association Data Privacy Committee. We don't know data privacy as well as they do.
Right? Okay, so then getting to if you want to talk about the attorneys, I've seen instances like especially with the ADA, that the ability of lawyers to find problems and places that don't comply with the ADA, that really helped that law get enforced and so I appreciate lawyers in that way. So I don't want to demonize.
I'm not
lawyers.
demonizing anybody, but we haven't heard about a harm right now that we'd be solving with the PRA.
Yeah, I think we could get more testimony than on the.
We could,
But we are getting more testimony, so yeah, the PRA
is recommending.
Right, so we have folks who
there.
want to testify about the PRA.
Yeah.
I'm hearing 2, no PRA right now, we can always revisit it. 2, some other combination
form
of PRA. 1, yes, full PRA.
Well,
You agree?
I think we're more.
Yeah.
So we're trying to build consensus out of that. So we'll now listen to our final witnesses who all have an opinion on the PRA. I believe ski association has a specific concern, but probably doesn't lead the PRA either. So we're gonna go through those witnesses as quickly as we can. We don't have to make a decision today, but that might move people and tell me that.
Right, it might, but I just like to go back to a point Wendy made that I think is just important as we look at the big goal, which is our goal in this committee is to balance business needs and our consumer needs and to protect consumers. And I think it's a fine line, and this is our challenge here, is finding a landing place on this. So I think we're all wanting to do both. And I think we just need to find that right spot. And I think it's a great business opportunity that I wish we had heard from our accounting firms about how they're solving this in the private sector. Because as we have heard, many companies outsource their data management to effective, trustworthy other entities and do a great job. We couldn't get somebody to come and
But
testify.
we heard Experian had a data breach, right? We trust them to do a great job with a data breach. They paid out consumers who took it upon themselves to have a private right of action. Our businesses are saying, don't create more exposure for us.
I appreciate it.
Because we don't generally hold on to people's data except if we're a small business trying to promote, retail promote.
Neckties and socks.
Exactly.
Well, I have so many socks next to me here.
So we have David Hall so used to being kept waiting by this committee. He didn't mean to do that to you this time.
No worries, at all.
He's enjoying having John in the chair.
It is.
And
Right.
looking on from afar.
It's nice to see you all engaged in the process.
And it's such a treat to have you back. John, thank you so much for your work on
Yes,
this. I
thank
know
you.
you've been playing a lot, so it's just great.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Over David. Hello.
Hello to all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back in
Feels
your
like a
new
homecoming.
fancy
It
role.
is, the chair is even familiar.
And it worked.
So I think you have a sense of why I'm asking you to come in. I will just say to set it up, I didn't realize that this bill created some kind of registry for the Secretary of State to manage of people who would like to widely opt out of of their data being collected, where,
In a very
and,
specific context.
okay, in a very, so can you point that
Yeah,
out to?
show
Yeah.
Or- yeah. I was hoping you were still
Absolutely.
able to,
So I sent you some testimony. I don't know
Oh,
if
you
you got
did?
it. It has the page.
I don't know.
It has the
did you
page.
got, you sent it yesterday?
No, I sent it
Okay.
right for it.
Oh, well. You should know better than no.
Old habits die hard, and I didn't expect you to have time to
Yeah,
read it. It's actually just for for you to come back
Right,
to.
okay.
So let me, first for your records,
Yeah.
officially for the first time, I'm David Hall, your former counsel, but currently the director of the Business Services Division at the Office of the Secretary of
That's
State.
wonderful.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here and see you all, and I appreciate the hard work you're doing in this bill. I know it well, and
Yes, you
thank
can,
you.
right?
Thank you for everything you're doing. So you'll see, if you do have that testimony, the page reference starts on page 76 of
Okay.
draft 1.1, which is
1.1.
dated
Oh, it's the data
April
broker.
10th, right?
Sorry, what page?
Starts on page 76.
I worry that may have changed.
Okay, if that's okay if it has, you're looking for subchapter 5,
Okay.
data brokers, and you're looking for 9
Here it
VSA
is.
2446.
Page 73,
Okay,
Of the new draft.
on or before January 1, 2026.
there's already a 2.1. I love it.
Yeah, there's 2.1. That also happened this morning.
It's been a very active morning.
I believe it. Well,
What section?
Let me-
is it? Oh,
Page 73.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
is it B, general opt-out?
So, yeah, let me give you a one, I know you're pressed for time and I'll try to be quick, but I need to put this in its proper place within your bill. I know you've got this massive construct about collectors and processors and all the rights that consumers are gonna have. The piece that I'm here on is very targeted, and this is specific to data brokers, which we started regulating in 2019. And remember that a data broker is the business that you don't have a direct relationship with, right? They're the third-party collector, aggregator, slice and dice, sell, profiles of cohorts of people. And Secretary of State's office was charged in 2019 with annually registering these businesses and requiring them to provide really a minimal amount of information. I have it listed out, but it's basically contact info. If you allow for an opt-out, how does it work? What's the method? What's the context? Tell us what you don't allow consumers to opt out of. Tell us if you have a credentialing process. That means you know what the people to whom you sell that data do with it. Tell us if you know how many breaches you've had, how many consumers have harmed. And if you have actual knowledge that you possess the data of minors, tell us how you treat that. So that's how the current law works. It's $100 annual registration fee. There's a penalty of about $50, max $10,000 a year if you fail to register. And we don't do the enforcement. The AG's office does the enforcement through civil penalties. So if you can think of this as an information filing, this is a repository for consumers to come and say, who are these data brokers and tell me what you know about them. It's not a lot. And you'll see, if you go back to my testimony, if you have it now, out of 118,600 plus businesses that are actively registered with the state of Vermont, we have 417 data brokers. And I was checking with my wonderful staff. I have 5 people on my team. They've all been there at least 8 years, some of them almost 20. They have a long institutional memory. And here's the rundown. We basically get 2 or 3 inquiries a year from data brokers about how do I update my contact info or my whatever.
Right.
And we have received 0 inquiries from Vermont consumers about data brokers.
You're kidding.
Right.
0 inquiries,
So
No phone calls, no emails.
can you go to the conclusion you're drawing?
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
sorry,
No
I don't wanna
worries.
rush you, but
Yeah.
this feels like a lot of work and maintaining a database that might not be secure.
Yeah.
Based on what you just said, how little.
Madam Chair, you nailed it.
Okay.
The whole thrust of my presentation to you is this wonderful conversation you're having about risk and reward. Potentially the reward here is you or I can go to the Secretary of State's office and avail ourselves of this database to opt out of 400 businesses practices. The cost is gonna be about $8 million. It's gonna be creating a repository of PII that we don't currently have and we don't frankly know how to protect at this point. And it's gonna take a few years.
I think that says it all. I don't know.
Well, no, I wanna.
So we can go to questions,
Yeah.
but I mean, we don't have that money. And
Right.
I see a lot of risk to maintaining a database of enough information of a consumer. So we're gonna have to ask ADS if they feel they can support you in making this secure enough, because you can't just say, I'm John Smith, delete my data. You have to give them a lot of personal information so they know they have the right John Smith. And that all just lives with the Secretary of State's office, who is saying, this is going to take us a long time and a lot of resources to make that secure for maybe
And they're exempt.
less than
from-
100 people.
They're exempt from the bill.
Yeah, I don't care if we have the money now or not. $8 million is a lot to do that and put people's data at risk more than they may realize. So if you have a question in that context, great, but otherwise we have to move on.
So you're saying we have this database?
Yes.
No,
No, we
you
have the
have to build it
registry.
from scratch. We have a registry.
We have the registry.
Oh, we have
Yeah.
the registry,
Yeah.
so we have a list.
We have a
Correct.
short list.
Is that list public?
It is.
It is.
Yep, and you can,
Okay.
and it gives you the contact information so that you could go to all of these businesses right now and say, please don't sell my data if you have that policy.
Okay,
This affirmatively puts the onus on the state to manage that process and to keep an ongoing
when you say
compilation.
this, that's the language.
Yes, yes.
I am gonna move us along because we have a lot of other ways.
Yeah, something I'm thinking about
Uh-huh.
is that getting on the internet and providing your information is a free will choice. If you don't want to have your information known, you don't have to have one of these.
Mhm.
You don't have to get on the internet and you don't have to give your data.
Right.
That is no longer true, Pam. You
It is.
cannot do very little
I'm,
with.
okay, so, but what they would be doing is giving their data to a website that might have less capacity to be secure than these other websites, to say, take it off other websites. This is a no from me. I'm gonna just claim chair's privilege because I can't promise this money. And
We can't, not
we
this year.
don't have the time to do something that just is a no.
Sorry, can
Yeah.
I just clarify before David leaves? And we
Sure.
haven't read your memo, we're sorry.
It's okay.
But you did send it.
It's here for the
Time
future.
fashion. So what, for you to say comply to this, it would cost you $8 million to set up the data system that is secure and
It is a minimum of 2 million to set it up. It's a $600,000 roughly annual operating cost. And we would ask you to increase the fees, but that would still be a shortfall of about $500,000 a year in operational costs because it wouldn't cover the maintenance, hosting, and security profiles that we would need. At least preliminary conversations with our IT vendor with whom we're working right now. I'd love to talk to you about our.
Yeah,
new
yeah,
system.
no.
That's a GovOps conversation.
Yeah, I think that we should chat about that, but at the moment, we also have only 0 people asking.
We do not have time to make this provision work, period.
David, thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much for
you.
coming. You've been the most valuable
You
witness.
know the clarity we need and the time we need it in.
I'm
And-
only sad that I didn't get to sit here longer.
Well, you know,
Stick around, stick
You-
around, come.
you packed the lunch in a very short amount of time. And I'm so glad that you have taken the time to understand the cost. That helps us a lot with understanding what we're asking people to do.
You're the only one, in fact, who has.
Well, I'm happy to help. Please don't hesitate to get
Thank
me back
you.
over here, of
Thanks,
course.
David.
All right.
Denise Riley Hughes. We have seen you on Zoom. I don't think we've had you in person in committee yet.
come once quietly with
Okay.
Commissioner Harrington.
Okay, and you
Yes.
sent us a memo
I did.
that I greatly appreciated. Will you print those?
I get to see Denise in GovOps on a regular basis.
So that takes care of one of my questions, which is, could ADS help government manage people's data more securely? And you do what you can and you'll tell us about that, but at a cost, at a great cost.
And this cross-references our workforce development bill too, because we also set this up. in
Okay,
7-7.
sorry. But we're striking the Secretary of State thing, so I don't have to ask you about that.
Well, so it's actually in my memo.
Yeah, oh, good, okay.
So can you ask that question, because I'm in the mind frame of the Secretary of State's, user registry and.
I guess starting with the framework for how you think about data privacy for all of the transactions that we fall under. And in my mind, at some point, when you tell us you're doing the best you can and you're working with outside vendors, if we can't hold ourselves to a higher standard under a private right of action, I don't know that it's fair to ask other people to do that. So I'm kind of looking for you to weigh out how you see this question, and I know you also spoke to the private right of action.
So from a government data standpoint, it's really interesting because when my agency goes into a contract with a third-party vendor, we're pretty explicit that we own the data, that they don't own the data. And so if it's cloud hosted, we know it's hosted in their environment, it's hosted on their platform, it's hosted in their product, but the data belongs to the state of Vermont. So from that perspective, we maintain privacy at a high level. The other piece is the security standards that we apply to all of our technology support and services. What we've never done in government is look at what does extracting data look like at a micro level. And so that's not how we operate today, because we take an assumption that for the most part, our records are public information. So from looking at government as being compliant to the way that the current bill suggests, we've looked at the example of the Secretary of State's registry. That would actually require them to register under themselves as a data broker. They would be considered a data broker. And that's not what the business that we're in. And so are there opportunities for us to disclose the information that we're collecting of Vermonters when we are providing a non-voluntary service? Maybe. And maybe not. Maybe it's too private that they're even doing the service with us. I think that we had a conversation in a past session around unemployment insurance. There's federal requirements that there's no disclosure about that. That is considered high-level PII. And so we do protect to the letter of the law. And we're trying to look at what the future looks like when it comes to data and AI. And so we're looking at this bill from a lens of future AI utilization and making sure that we build the right or have the right controls, parameters, and security around those data sets and data stores. But as far as looking at how we remove that today, that is not how government operates.
Right. So let's go to your memo, because then we can kind of, we can make some decision about the direction we head in. First of all, just thank you for mentally unlocking this conundrum with the existing AI Advisory Council. We've put that in motion. We've seen it working really well. We've seen it have former Supreme Court justices and people who get really invested in this balance. And it seems to be working well. I will be working with our legislative council to draft something that does create a subcommittee and modifies this language that we passed last biennium. I'd be happy to include you in that, or your data person. Oh, you're the data person. The data person.
You got
anybody who should be included. And I'm just grateful that you all, usually people don't step forward and say, task us with this, but this is the right place for this conversation. Senator Clark.
So I would love to know how, and we can do this offline, maybe not here.
Yeah.
But I would love to know, because I know you testified in House Commerce in the workforce development bill, in the task force to study the data management models and that whole, how we integrate all our state data. So I need to know how what we're doing possibly here integrates with this. We make sure we have that conversation.
Let's have that conversation.
I definitely think it's important to have that conversation because we actually are the first state to have a chief data AI office and officer.
And that's who
Is that
you
who you
are.
are?
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the record and be part of this?
Sure, for the record, I'm Josiah Ration, I'm the state's chief data and AI officer.
Congratulations
Right.
on the critical role that you play. But it's very important and we're grateful. So, we are working on the proactive side on data privacy and that's something to celebrate.
Yes.
So let's have an offline conversation about how you all show up in the infrastructure of good data privacy. We have taken the opt-out out. So the general opt-out, I should say. I don't know if you were here just for the Secretary of State testimony.
Perfect.
But it sounds like you're okay with, I mean, we have the individual opt-out and it mirrors California's Delete Act. But there is no way we're creating a new database, and it sounds like you're gonna say the same thing. We've put a lot more interoperability back in, as you may have seen. Actually, we released the draft this morning. So
Yes, I
we reverted back to Connecticut in many places when it comes to data minimization, and reducing the enhanced consent. We went to a threshold of 25,000 or 50% of your business is buying, transferring, selling data. That's where we are. Do you want to speak to the threshold and interoperability piece or look at that bill and give us final comments as we do a final draft?
I will definitely reserve the right to do final comments. However, when we look at the intent of this bill and who would be covering, this really is not about hurting Vermont businesses. This is about protecting Vermont businesses and Vermonters from, data privacy issues and challenges. I'll read the details on the caveat. We had an overwhelming level of feedback outside of my agency, so we're not public facing, we're definitely an internal source.
Right.
That mirroring regional approaches moving. And New Hampshire came up with 35,000, and I know that the goal of most states is to go down to 0.
Right.
And so we came in strong with a low number based on percentage of population, but when we're looking at a small percentage, that could be challenging, right? And so we don't want to lose potential service opportunities for farmers there. I'm gonna look back at the language on the threshold, but at 50%, that's high watermark for the businesses that actually are doing.
It's 25,000 unique users or 50% of you're essentially a data broker.
Correct.
Yes.
So our concern with 50% specifically is that there is a set of relatively large tech companies that could be not abiding by this because they could say, we don't make 50% of our income and we have 24,000 Vermonters, right? So the original language was 25%, which I think matches Delaware. 25%.
35 was Delaware.
Okay.
No, it's two different.
Two different things, right? So there's the more,
Yeah.
the companies that make a large percent of their money from selling data.
Right.
That
was at 25%.
That was at 25%, and 25% seems appropriate.
Okay, so do you think we could do 25,000 or 25%?
I think that could work, and where we were actually gonna go was, let's start with the same threshold as New Hampshire, 35,000, and then potentially look at ramping that down over time and kind of structuring that from the.
Okay, and leave out the 25%.
I think the 25% is still important to have.
Okay, so 35K and 25%.
So just trying to get to a percent of our population. 5% of our population is 32.5.
So let's do 35.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just trying to.
Does anyone have any questions about that request and where your numbers are coming from? Which I appreciate you reminding me about the 50%. We, in our kids code bill, we want to go after the biggest companies.
Yes.
But here we still want to give data privacy to more folks, so we want to lower that threshold. Okay. Finally, the PRA. What I'm seeing here is that you all think the council could take on a future recommendation on a PRA. Is that right?
Yes, that is our recommendation in the memo. We did have an opportunity to talk to members of, you can come on up, come on, you can say right. And so there is
Okay.
there's a lot of churn around this conversation right now. And we've been advised by the AG's office because I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. This adds a cure period where the current consumer protection law does not have one. So I believe that there was an intent that that would protect small businesses.
Exactly.
There is some concerns, and you can share it. I do want to be on record to say that, as the Agency of Digital Services, we do support the notion of a PRA. We just want to make sure, as it's written, that we don't go from zero to enforcement.
Yeah.
And can help protect and manage the process through.
Yeah.
And that was the original stance that we took, and I do believe we still feel that way.
That's what you recommended in House Commerce too?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to then remove the PRA until you all can come back and recommend to us how it would be structured with the
That
advice
works.
of the AG.
The only thing to be careful of is any impact on cure period. So there is an underlying.
Right,
PRA.
and that's why the issue I've been having all along is we have a lot of businesses who said, just take out the PRA because it just make it go away, but I'm worried that then it's still there and it doesn't have any caveats. So I frankly, without creating unintended consequences, I would take the PRA out entirely until your council could come back with advice on how to structure the PRA.
So having not gotten to
Yeah.
spend very much time with the draft that came out this morning, which we'll certainly
So-
do. I think having a general cure period in there that's broadly applicable to any actions. I don't remember if there's a cure period on the AG section anymore either. I don't think there is. So having a cure period
The
that's,
cure period for the AG.
well, a cure period like in general.
Yeah.
Right?
The
Before-
problem with that cure period, it was very short. I mean, for a small business, it was a 30-day turnaround with like 15 days to respond. I moved it to 60.
Yeah.
So
Which is still short.
it's short and it said 15 days to respond about it.
Yeah, it was too short.
And most small businesses don't retain legal counsel on staff.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
that's only useful to you, general counsel.
So I'm worried that even 60 days, which is what we moved to in our bill, isn't enough. I don't think we're ready for a PRA.
So
from what I'm hearing.
But if we have to deal with it, what would you, I would appreciate a recommendation on a cure period you thought we could manage that was usable. I would only be okay. If we-
But I don't wanna put you on the spot because we've heard a lot of testimony on this. We don't have time to hear about all the businesses that use other data privacy systems right now. We don't have time to do a good job of it. I don't think. So I'm kind of going back to our secretary here. It's a political question. Do you feel we're ready to implement a PRA with just a cure period, regardless of how long it is?
If government was not exempt from this bill and this applied to me today, I would not be prepared to be able to do this.
And your government, and you have a whole agency.
I just want to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's,
But
I wanna hear like, if I'm my mechanic say, this is what I would do, you know?
But she also thinks it's important for us to do, so I would say if people are going in this direction, that we specifically charge the AG working with ADS and whatever other group you would pull together to do this, come back with a recommendation in a time frame. So that we have a time frame, that we do the education through the AGs, and then, so I think we need to figure that piece out and who would be working on this, the PRA piece.
I'm agreeing there, we agree there. I'm not prepared to implement a PRA while we fly the plane.
Right, but I want this in the bill. I don't want.
That's right,
Okay.
I'm right,
Yeah,
on this down for the bill. But you're saying,
Essentially,
leave
you're
the cure
asking
period
for
for the
a
AG.
study
Yes,
of the PRA, but no implementation.
No,
and
exactly.
Specific implementation timeline. There may be a timeline for the completion of the study, but just recognize that the longer this goes on, the more the environment changes and the needs, if any, for PRA. We
Right.
also have it, and one of the questions I have for you is, have you looked at the proposed federal privacy bill that's pending in Congress right now?
I just got note on it last night, and I was.
Well, the reason I raise that.
But I know that there's overlap and there's conflict.
There is overlap. There is, as I understand it, a PRA in that. There's some possibility, in fact, that this may be passed this session, although I've heard different statements about that. And one of the things I'm concerned about overall is that we spend a lot of time and money building something that gets overridden and superseded by federal law almost imminently before we've had a chance to do it.
My guess is it won't happen by the time we get this.
When you brought us, you know, this reminder of your counsel and this desire and, you know, or just this offer to expand it to cover data, that is game changing for me because we're not data experts. You're data experts who can say, you know, business can do this more easily than they might be telling you. But if we were doing this today, we'd be subject to a lot of lawsuits before we could meet something that's actionable. We need to give businesses very clear guidance on how they're supposed to comply before the private right of action is even a specter that they have to focus on. You will be able to set parameters and listen to the AG in a way that gives me a lot more comfort. And I think the question on the table is how we think we have more expertise than a group we set up to look at our technology future.
I don't think that's the question. I think we're saying give green lighting. You know, at least I'm beginning to hear a green light on the experts actually coming back to us with the AG and ADS and other stakeholders that are key to this. To a private right of action after we've also begun educating that this is maybe coming down the pike. This is important. I think some of us care a lot about keeping this conversation alive and developing it and getting better.
But doing it right. That's what I care about, and I don't think we can take responsibility.
And also Connecticut has a whole section of their AG's office for enforcement of their bill too. Which we're not even considering that. So there has to be some sort of enforcement at some point.
Oh,
at some point.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it gives us longer to look at Illinois.
Connecticut has Connecticut money, you know, so we're asking our experts right now what they would do.
Right, but also Connecticut
research.
would have done a PRA if they could have gotten it through, is what I heard from.
We heard that one senator, and then that he was stopped from doing that.
There are other states that do have PRAs. From a court enforcement, just keep in mind, you do the research on California, it's taken us years to get to the point, and it happens this year, 6 years. Not even for PRA, but for enforcement on data privacy.
And Illinois jumped right in, so we have Illinois also benefited from the California challenges.
Right, and we're all working very closely at various levels, both within the ADS, within legislature.
And with the AG.
100%.
Yeah, because
I think we're working
AG's
more closely
heavily
now.
invested. It has been for years since we did this initial data broker bill with them. Beginning 8 years ago.
So I think tasking you with the structure of the PRA is enough of an intent to say, we'll do it if you all come back and say this is workable. But we're not putting it in and saying it's happening no matter what. We're letting you come back with guidance that we then absorb and weigh.
I think we have a cafeteria moment here. With where we and we sat and we haven't heard. Oh, and the AG walked in right at this very moment.
Well,
because we haven't yet heard from the AG. But the cafeteria moment for me is to have the AG and the Charity and Denise and their teams work together developing how this might.
Yes, and I also think that there's a good recommendation for the council as well to look at, we're talking 3 things here. We're talking consumer protection, we're talking consumer privacy, and we're talking data privacy. And so we have to start building
And the burden on
clear
business.
definitions on
Yes.
which ones actually in the driver's seat. and
Even
which
you
ones-
saying that is bringing expertise that we don't responsibly have anywhere else that we're
Let me
getting.
also add though,
Yeah.
that somewhere in our bill, as we're talking about this study, we also ought to name the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee, which involves oversight of issues such as data usage, data security.
So like a
privacy.
liaison?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Liaison, and also a recipient of the reports that
Yes.
come back on this
Right,
and also a
right.
contributor to it.
Okay. I'm writing all of this down. I mean, I'm gonna be working on this draft, but if you all wanna have more input, you can certainly send that to all of us.
I think it would be really helpful if they,
I mean, otherwise you can respond to what John is already working on this front, which might be helpful.
John here.
No, but he already knew he was reconfiguring the AI
Okay.
council. So
And getting rid of.
anything else that
Right.
you want to say, obviously, we're gonna be in very close touch, and Josiah, it sounds like you have a lot of knowledge that we benefit from. It sounds like you've been to GovOps.
No, he hasn't.
Well, that's, I used to want to.
You testified, you were online though.
Yes. I
Not in
Okay,
person.
so that's good, because I worried, on GovOps, I was the data person, and I'm glad we're still keeping that focus. Great job. So we have more work to do, but you've given us like a real gift in terms of how to move forward. I think we appreciate that.
This is a very important bill. And it is a starting point for a lot to come in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pacing ourselves is gonna be really important. Because you made the point that we've been talking about this whole time, which is, let's get it right the first time out of the gate. We don't have to boil the ocean
Yeah.
at first pass, but
Yes.
with the intent that all of these things that have been drafted in here, everything's very important. We just need to pace ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you.
You can be the pace car, you and Charity drive the pace car.
I do want to make sure that our most recent provisions take care of the concern of the press. The press has a real constitutional role and responsibility, and we have Emily Emery from the News Alliance who gave input on the kids code. You have to go.
In a couple minutes, yeah, I'm not chair.
Okay. Senator Cummings, are you okay with the direction of a council coming back?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Is it okay?
Yes, you can move. Thank you so much. Hi, Emily. We've only, I think, connected via email, so it's great to have you. And just a couple minutes to make sure you know that that you feel secure that the press is allowed to do their jobs without interference in the bill.
I very much appreciate the time and the chance to speak with you all today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks very much. So again, Emily Emery, Vice President with the News Media Alliance. We represent over 2,200 diverse publishers in the US and internationally. And this ranges from the largest publishers and conglomerates into local newspapers and ecosystems. And Vermont is one of the most unique news ecosystems in the country. As mentioned, we did speak on the kids code and the approach there, and appreciate the exemption and the sensitivity, or the exclusion, I should say, but most specifically to the broader commercial and consumer privacy legislation that you're considering. We submitted brief written testimony to just make 2 points. First, there are 16 states now and almost 17 that have passed consumer privacy legislation, only 2 of which have applied a moderate or slight private right of action, that, as you'd mentioned recently, California on data brokers and Illinois on genetic and biometric information. The reason that's really important for publishers is consistency across state lines. So you could think of local publishers who may have presence not just in Vermont, but also Maine, for example, and Massachusetts, and looking for that operational certainty there. The second one that I can say is private right of action inherently introduces risk of politically motivated or frivolous litigation. And while some members are well poised to present and rebut against that, it is a particular and disproportionate concern for smaller or medium-sized entities.
Great. So I just was like reviewing everything, but you said that New Hampshire and Maine, or somebody has a specific exemption for the press.
Sorry, just mentioning, the exemption in regards to the kids online, so age appropriate design code is the exemption. We would not see, right.
You want that same exemption in this bill?
And appreciate it. And just to be clear, we are not asking for a news media exemption in the broader comprehensive data privacy bill. We do believe all businesses should be subject to the same rules of the road as it applies to consumer privacy. Sometimes heightened processing for larger companies, but just to be clear, I was wanted to distinguish between the two bills. We're not seeking an exemption here.
So interoperability and the PRA are the concerns of the press as similarly situated organizations that manage sensitive data.
Having alignment both in enforcement and also on definitions, and trying to hew as closely as possible to other states that have advanced legislation on their definitions helps provide operational certainty and also helps get the right advisors in the room. So people who are crafting compliance regimes for privacy, the ability to have a single model that works across jurisdictions is the best way to ensure good faith compliance and efforts there.
Okay, so I would take a look at our latest draft of our bill 2.1 because it exempts more publicly available data and I think includes some new exemptions that also give the press the opportunity to do their jobs.
Extremely appreciated. We'll absolutely take a look and be happy to give any feedback there in writing. And so grateful for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Madam Attorney General.
Thank you.
So I just want to start by giving some credit to Senator Clarkston. I mean, we sometimes have people give us their written feedback, but then they're slated to testify. So we have their testimony and the written feedback. If Senator Clarkston didn't point out that you had emailed us during committee, after we had begun, we wouldn't have seen your comments.
Okay.
So
Well,
that's why we
I
called
believe we included the committee assistant.
No, I
Yeah, but
think
we
true,
started at 8:30, so.
So we had started.
It's a week
I was
after the new
doing
draft.
something that needed to
We
be
had
done.
possible vote on this. so.
Okay, well,
But
thank
we're
you
not-
so much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that we didn't give you that feedback this year. So I really, I mean, I wrote down what I had to say,
Well, we
I'm not
didn't
sure
have a
everybody
chance to
had a
look at it,
Yeah,
because we were
okay.
already meeting.
So, and then since I wrote that, a new draft was dropped that has more, changes. So I had two, things I wanted to point out in my, memo that I wrote the committee. The first related to the private rate of action.
And we can let go 2429, because
Oh.
we've created a new path on that
Okay,
with ADS.
all right, so the second was 2429. So, the new path that you have created with ADS, is that in the bill?
Not yet.
Should you tell me about it so that I don't have to write you another memo at the last minute?
I'm sure, because I think it relates to the private right of action too. I mean, I think
Okay.
we've heard a little bit of their testimony, but I think what you missed them saying, which bears repeating, is if the private right of action applied to government today, then ADS would be extremely worried and would not be able to support it. Because they currently would not.
That is a much bigger, more complicated goal. I would wanna pull someone in from our civil team to talk about that. That's not so easy to do.
We're not pulling government
Oh,
in, but if ADS is telling us that they don't believe they could comply when the bill is passed and the PRA would be hanging over them, that they would like to be part of taking the time with the appropriate experts to make sure this is actionable, that businesses understand it, and they come back with the appropriate scale PRA for further consideration.
But government isn't included, but you want ADS to be a part of the conversation on.
Well, last biennium, as you may know,
Yeah.
we set up an AI.
That was just for state AI stuff.
They have pulled a lot of stakeholders together that they believe could continue this work. You've said that 2429 can't apply to you. We need an entity that can help create the guidance that you're saying is not appropriate for you to do because.
No, that's fine. I think that existing, my understanding is that existing council is just looking at AI.
And they are saying, so they've sent us a memo that you can
to
look
broaden.
at on our website.
Yeah, that would be great.
To
broaden
add
the
data, now
and
that they
AI.
have if we have a chief technology officer in the state, I believe they should be at the helm how this is, it is communicated to businesses and how businesses are able to interact. That's where the expertise lies on how data privacy functionally works. So we are asking to task them with working with you on the right approach to a private right of action and to come back to
Well,
us.
private right of action is different because that's a legal mechanism that already exists in the Consumer Protection Act and has since 1967. It's just not a statutory damages provision included. It's conjunctive relief and actual damages. So that exists right now. Small businesses probably didn't mention it because we don't see.
We know that.
Oh, okay.
We know that, but then Commerce put in a cure period.
Yes.
And we will probably leave the cure period as it applies to the AG's enforcement. But I don't feel comfortable that we are subjecting businesses to a PRA before we tell them how to comply. How would you
Well,
see that
normally you
issue?
pass a law and there's an enforcement mechanism and we do like a year period where we try to educate folks about.
So you
the
don't
new
think the
law.
PRA should take effect either when the bill passes?
I just don't think it's necessary to have a delay in its effect, because we do that anyway.
So when I say we are concerned, I am concerned, I think we've heard this from others at the table, there is a concern.
That businesses won't know about it and then an individual will sue them.
Yes.
And they
That's
won't
what
have
this is.
time to do the cure period.
Well, 30
They
days,
won't know
no,
what
that's
to
a ridiculous
Oh.
cure period.
I thought it was 120. Did it change again?
It came to us as 30.
Oh, I thought it came to
But
us
we
60.
we beefed it up.
We beefed it up to 60 and 120. I don't have confidence right now with our labor market and the operation of small businesses that interact with 6,000, 25,000 people that a cure period is going to be, we're gonna get that right. So if you're using the cure period as the way to give businesses time to come under the PRA,
to comply with the law. Because the risk
a
there.
new law that we won't take effect
Yeah,
until July 1.
I think the challenge that you're balancing is the violation has occurred, and so the consumer is having an impact, whatever, depending on what it is.
But we need to better understand the violation that's occurred.
So that's just to go to a conversation that I don't know if Sarah was in the room for or not, but one of the things we'd asked Chris for was a fuller illustration of the harms that we're trying to.
Yes, I testified about those last week.
Yeah, and so I think that is, or some members of the committee are feeling that they're not clear enough on
The urgency of the
urgency
PRA.
of the harms to do this immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
think
so
there's
you wanna
also a
phase it in.
sense that
And
we're
phase it
rushing
in.
to get finished on an artificial timeline, and we haven't thought this through as thoroughly as we should have. And so extra time and also additional expertise in dealing with these areas from first people within ADS who have at least some expertise in the general area of data privacy and how to manage data privacy systems. I think it's going to be important to us.
Okay.
Well,
So I just wanted to address some of the provisions that do relate to our office. Regarding the cure period, so
you said you prefer the House's 60-day cure period.
to 120.
That's what you wrote in your statement here.
I thought it was 60.
You just
in
said
house.
thought it was 120.
Yours is 120. The new bill is 120.
The 2.1 sadly it doesn't have it in at all.
But you prefer the 60-day to 120?
Yeah, I can be shorter.
You think it should be shorter while we're also helping businesses learn how to comply?
Well, they currently have how much time? They don't have any cure period right now.
No, with a prior right of action of the CPA.
Yes,
No.
they have no cure period. So
Especially because the idea with that is damages, so the damages are being done and you want to be able to rectify them as soon as possible. So it's very rare to have a private right of action under the CPA. So regarding the cure period, just taking a step back on the role of the Attorney General has,
But I want to stay with the cure period because
okay,
we'd be applying the cure period to you as well.
right, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so you want your office to have a 60-day cure period?
No, this is why I'm trying to tell you about
Okay.
the office.
So the Attorney General, lawyer to the state, enforces laws like CPA, which this one connects to. Prosecutors, enforcers of laws like the Attorney General have what's called prosecutorial discretion. So the cure period isn't necessary, that's baked into the prosecutorial discretion of the Attorney General. Like, we always apply our prosecutorial discretion when we are deciding whether or not to investigate, whether or not to bring a case. That's just part of what we have to do whenever we approach, a complaint that we get at the Consumer Assistance Program, and how we approach it's just part of what we have to do. So if it were up to me, I would just I would keep in 24-25 on page 40. Oh, I don't have the new bill. I only have the.
That's okay, just tell us the section.
Okay. Maybe it's just the new bill.
241 is the new bill.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and you do have
Okay,
that.
all right, good. So 24-25, I would just leave
What
A,
page you on?
that's on 48. And it begins with the traditional language, you see it when laws connect to the CPA. A person who violates this chapter or rules adopted pursuant to this chapter commits an unfair and deceptive act in commerce in violation of section 2453 of this title. 2453 is the core of the Consumer Protection Act. The rest of it, I would delete because I don't think it's necessary, because it's already part of what we do under 2453. Once you remove the private right of action, you don't need a cure period, because that's just what we do at the AG's office under 2453.
What are you saying you do, that you offer a cure period?
No, but that's just part of the application of procedural discretion. So we would say, oh, we're not gonna pursue this one, or a classic example is when the data broker registry went in place, we had people who violated the law, and we would just tell them, hey, you violated the law, they just went back, did you not know? Okay, we did prosecute them.
Right, so you are able to build in a cure period per case, if something.
Yeah, and there's no time frame. It's just us applying our
prosecutorial discretion.
Exactly. So
Right.
that's like meat and potatoes of what we do at the consumer unit. So wanted to.
What's like a average length of time you usually give for curing?
It totally varies. I mean, sometimes we don't even bring an action. Sort of, and every, behavior and facts are run a spectrum, so it's hard to say. And sometimes it just like takes years to even investigate. So, we will be investigating, and the public doesn't even know what's, happening.
So you're saying take out the PRA, but then leave you.
No, I'm not saying take out the PRA. I'm saying you have taken out the PRA, and once you do, you complete the cure period altogether.
The B1,
We would be taking out A though also.
A is what gives the Attorney General approval.
We have in S269, we had a different provision that gave sole authority to the AG.
That's what this is. When you say the 2453, you're connecting it to the
2453 has the PRA in it.
Well, it has that, it has the civil investigative demand.
Right, so we are saying all of this applies except the PRA.
So you'd be excluding this from the rest of the Consumer Protection Act?
Until we get information back on how to do a good job educating people before we subject them to a
So
private right.
this would be the only consumer statute in our book.
It was previously the only one that had a cure period when it came from the House, so we are seeing that there is a need to give people clarity before we subject them to a PRA on this bill. That philosophy came to us from the House.
But if you remove the private right of action
that currently exists.
Yes, which is.
I think we don't want to take out what currently is available for our consumers in Vermont.
I think that's an open question.
But that already exists in law, this piece.
The open question here is, are we subjecting them to something before we do education?
No, this is currently in law, is my understanding.
We'd be subjecting them to a PRA.
No, there already is an opportunity for them to do a PRA.
That we can, our S269 that you're the lead sponsor of, has language that doesn't subject them to the PRA.
But
do you, Congress, to clarify the difference between the PRA, so the PRA that exists, it does not have a monetary amount that says this is the amount if there's a violation. Instead, it says you get, injunctive relief, or attorney's fees and damages. So we would be depriving consumers when they establish they have actual damages.
Okay, that's your bill, Senator Claxton, that you introduced. It gives sole enforcement power to the AG until we have a better handle on what we are asking businesses to do. Guidance hasn't been issued.
Right, I am actually at the moment completely confused, so I.
Okay,
need to
well, I would
fix
just leave it the way it is. This is like longstanding how it's worked in consumer law for decades. We'd be doing something novel that I don't.
Can you explain what the harm is of doing something novel?
I think you'd be depriving consumers of the right to take action for harms that they have experienced related to their data privacy.
Right away, when the bill takes effect.
Yeah, I mean, whatever
But
happened.
that already exists, you're saying.
Because the
Under the
House did
CPA.
contemplate moving the PRA out
Different
several
PRA.
years.
These are so different PRAs.
Yeah, we have a longstanding PRA, which as I mentioned, is very rarely used.
Mhm.
And I know because under the statute, you have to inform the Attorney General. I've never heard anybody using it, so.
This is regarding all violations. of
Yes,
consumer-
All violations, not just data.
Exactly, exactly. So anyway, that's why I would just leave it the way, I would delete the cure
So
period.
that was a different private right of action than the one.
It's the one that's in the consumer protection.
I know that, but
It looks different, yeah.
why did we need a PRA?
Because this has a statutory amount that's included. Just like it does for the Attorney General. So the amount in the CPA right now when the Attorney General brings an action is $10,000, which has been interpreted by courts to be per consumer for violation.
So we were doing a unique PRA just to get the amount for violation.
Because, yes, so this amount was $1,000. So less. Well, yeah, the private right of action was less.
Okay, so you wanted the private right of action in here so that there was a lower threshold.
No, so that
For
it
damages.
existed, there isn't a statutory damages, i.e. an actual amount of money that's listed in the CPA private right of action because you have to have damages, actual damages. Problem with data privacy, this is obvious, and I'm gonna say
Is
it
that
in case it's
something-
not, is that it can be hard to quantify what the damages are. For example, at the Consumer Assistance Program, all day long, we get calls from people saying, I'm worried that I gave my information to a scammer and now my identity is gonna be stolen, and we give them emotional support, we send them an identity theft packet, but hanging over their head forever is the sense that their social security number has been compromised and now someone's gonna steal their identity. I mean, how do you quantify that? You know, so that's part of why, so data privacy has a number
Of $1,000.
of $1,000 attached to it.
Okay.
But the CPA has a number attached to it too, which is it has to be more than.
For the Attorney General's being for an action.
For the Attorney
But the
General.
private right of
has to be
action
more than 10.
is actual damages.
Okay.
You can look it up in Title IX if that.
We were looking at Title IX
Okay.
for the whole time we were doing, it's on my desk right now, actually.
Yeah.
It's right
I think
here.
it's 2458 is the.
Yeah, it's not actually, that's,
Really?
yeah,
Is the private.
not in the green books.
2458.
It may be in
No,
this piece.
but it's not in there
No,
either.
it's really old. 2461 is the private right of action portion. You want to look that, but I know you guys are trying to.
I do wanna look it up, let's look it up. Cause we were given a different.
Jones here.
Okay, so 2458 is restraining prohibited acts, so that's the,
That's the Attorney General stuff. And then
Okay.
2461 is where the private right of action is.
okay.
2461B.
And that's got the $10,000.
No, there is no statutory amount for private business. Statutory amount in the CPA for the Attorney General.
2461B, this is the problem I had last time, it's the regulation of propane.
There's one for telephone, there's one for
There's,
propane.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the
it's
private right of
complicated.
action is embedded in the regulation of propane.
And
The
other
private right of action is
statutes.
embedded in the robocalls.
Yeah,
So where are you telling me there's a blanket private right of action?
it's in there, I'm sorry, there.
Can you get me that reference? Because you just referred me to the regulation of propane.
I
It
know.
is 24, sorry to interrupt, Sarah said as Attorney General. It is 2461B. I would recommend that your committee assistant print it out because that is the correct reference.
What we were only able to find is annotated statutes online. I'm trying to find the full statute 2461B.
It could be in the supplement in the back of the book.
Is it built into the regulation of propane? It's not in the supplement.
So
You're
first-
free to look. This is what we use.
Given where we are, get this. So given where we are, I would love to be some clarity on what is currently covered what we wanna do, and what we wanna get to, and how much time we need to phase it in, and how. we phase it.
Right, what's in annotated statute comment does not say private right of action. We looked at that paragraph. So I need someone to come back to us with the reference to a blanket private right of action in the Consumer Protection Act.
Which,
Would that inform how you approach this bill?
It would be helpful to finally see that language, because no one has shown up that reference.
Okay,
The
so
statute
just
is online,
moving on to the
and it's
other
regulation of propane.
portion that I noticed is the idea that there would be an oversight board for the Attorney General in doing her work. I see that.
We're not doing that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
That was a work in progress
can't
as we
keep up.
try to put some education together that wasn't.
Okay,
built.
so
that's moving to
section
ADS.
24-27 is,
All of that will change.
the Enforcement Oversight Board won't exist.
No.
Okay, so this is. And then the last thing, which sounds like this might change too, I was gonna say I was neutral on the creation of a competitive bidding process for a contractor to perform the education.
Mhm.
So neutral on that one, but maybe you already have a different plan for that.
We do want to ask you if you think you are the right entity to select that bid.
Yes.
and I think you are, because you already oversee a lot of education on a lot of other stuff.
Well, we educate on enforcement.
Do you have a sense of how much money we should appropriate? Can you get?
We
a
usually do this
recommendation?
ourselves, so.
Well, that's what I thought you said you could do it yourself.
We do, we.
We have
that's what
heard that we don't want the actual enforcer of the law to help individual small businesses comply. We're looking at bids from clinic and groups that work one-on-one with businesses to help educate them and help them comply. I don't think
And
you
help
do
them
that.
comply. We don't help people comply, because you
So
can't
that's
be
right, you're
lawyers,
just
but
issuing
we
blanket
educate.
guidance.
The law
Yeah,
school
yeah.
small business clinic suggested that there was an appropriate way for them to be able to help smaller
Oh,
businesses.
that's great.
Which I think is a great.
We would still wanna do the education, well, I mean,
Yeah.
if they're doing it.
I think guidance is different than education.
Yeah, what we have experienced is that when the Attorney General says something, and that's like the whole
Right.
core of
The way
our program, is
you're
people get.
We're
so
allowing you to do
yeah.
that in-house, you're issuing
Yeah,
guidance
that's fine. We would
and
do that
model
anyway.
language,
Okay,
and you might
perfect.
issue opinions. But we need someone to help, I mean, I just wanna remind us all, when we put a big new regulation like this in place, the businesses that are most vulnerable to a lack of compliance are our smallest businesses, our immigrant businesses.
But they're
our
carved
women.
out, small businesses are carved out.
Where?
I thought that there was a threshold that you've added.
Well, the house had 6,000 customers,
Mhm.
that's a pretty small business.
So you would raise it?
We
We're
raised
raising it to probably 35,000
Mm-hmm.
to be in line with other states.
So, yeah, that's good.
That's still a small business,
Yeah.
35,000 customers.
I'll also just, I know I plugged this
That's
last time,
small,
but
Charlie.
we have a small business advocate
35,000.
in our office. So at the Consumer Assistance Program at UVM, we have a small business advocate, and if you ever have a small business who has concerns navigating things, please refer them to her, because. we're
Well, if
really
you could have
supportive.
her help us with this with the final pieces of the bill, that would be great.
Sure.
Because we want small business advocacy mixed
Uh-huh.
into the overall how we roll out the PRA.
Okay.
So we want that voice at the table.
Mhm.
She might be helping determine what the additions are to the AI and data. Council that comes out with the PRA.
Yeah, so I'm cognizant
Yeah.
it's 12:15, we all have other
I do,
things.
yes, but I
But
need to actually give Molly a second.
Okay.
To just be, Molly's been waiting patiently the whole day and past days on ski area.
Okay, but before we get
Yes.
to bottling our minds further.
Okay.
I didn't necessarily, when we put in that data privacy bill, I don't wanna have my toes held to that fire because so much has happened since
Mhm.
then. I don't want to do anything to infringe on whatever the current right exists in the AG's office.
We're
I
gonna
think
keep
we-
thinking about that.
I think we want.
No
to-
one's shown me the reference that I need to see.
I know, but they're gonna get it.
Okay.
Because they clearly do it and they already clearly are, but have done it. What I wanna make sure is that that it sounds like this committee is okay with. Is what we had talked about with Denise is phasing in, working with AV with Denise. And phasing in a private right of action that works, that enforcement works, compliance is
Mhm.
possible. in a phased way begin soon.
And
so
until
we
then,
start
there's no
phasing.
private right of action. That's what we were saying. Is that there is no underlying private right of action until we come back with better information.
Except for what currently exists, already in the consumer.
I'm
And that-
withholding
we
my
can
judgment
discuss
on that until
Okay.
someone shows me that overall.
Fine, but once, hopefully that is shown.
Yeah.
So that is where I hope we are at the moment for this bill to move forward in this committee. It's-
Okay.
it's Sadly, that, that's where I think we, who wanted the whole private right of action, right, I think that's where this committee is landing, is on phasing it in, coming up with a group to recommend how.
Okay, before I lose the quorum, I'm gonna let Molly have the last word from the ski association.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Cherry, more to follow.
Okay.
Oh, you
no,
gave
that's
me the memo, but it sounds like you've already.
No, we.
And I have an op-ed I attached.
Yeah, no, the op-ed is terrific. And I think we just need.
Can I just ask, I wanted to reference that this is the op-ed that says the dislike of the so-called private right of action is a boogeyman spooking legislators saying the bill will struggle to pass if it's included.
It's on, I think it's attached.
I don't think we have. Okay, but you're kind of ascribing intent to us.
Well, I wrote that in February.
It was a long time.
Last year, the House spent tons of time on.
This
a
was
bill.
23, you wrote this in February.
No, it was, I wrote it in the fall, but
Yeah.
it was published in February, but yeah, in that last session. They would really trip everybody up, and if you talk to industry. This was before the cure period, but if you talk to industry, they would say like, the priority of action, it's really hard, and then.
Does that make it a boogeyman if they say it's hard?
Because they would say it's never gonna pass, and we would say.
Well, we don't
why?
care if it passes or not, we care if businesses can act on it.
But I think just saying you know what, I think let's move on and hear from Molly, because I've gotta get.
Okay.
But I.
Molly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we're really stressed for time, so I really appreciate getting me on. Molly McGuire, President of Vermont Ski Areas Association. I just have two asks in, this goes to aligning definitions with Connecticut construct, so it's pretty,
We're
should be
working on
pretty
that.
straightforward. I'm on page 2, line 10. This is the biometric definition.
Oh, and that being looked at it also over, right? Page 2, line 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, this is the definition of biometric data, and, we'd like to strike on that line, the words linked or reasonably linkable to an individual's. And this just broadens that, this broadens the definition to any datable linkable to an individual, and it's confusing for controllers that aren't using biometric data at all. So and this is not in Connecticut's definition either, so it would apply potentially more obligations to somebody that's not even using biometric data. And then the second.
Do you feel comfortable saying where this concern came in for you? Because that was very illustrative for me.
I'll actually get to that, well.
Okay.
So, line 17 to 20. The definition includes depictions, images, descriptions, or recordings. This is Romanet number 7 and Romanet 8. Data derived from any data in subdivision 7 of this subdivision, to the extent that it would be reasonably possible to identify the specific individual from whose biometric data the data has been derived. Those two issues are problematic for ski areas because they do include data for season pass products, for example. They keep people's images in their database for that specific purpose. And these two Romanets are not included in other states in the generally accepted definition of biometric data. So we don't want to put ski areas in the position of saying, okay, consumer, now we're collecting your biometric data, and everybody's like, what?
It's on every one of our passes to get into the building is our photo. I mean, photos are used lots of places.
Right.
Right.
Part of.
I think we'll have to look at how this fits into the bill, how we say you can or cannot use biometric data, and it might require an additional consideration. You may have heard we were balancing this, we were trying not to create the slippery slope of you can use someone's biometric data to kick them out of a stadium because their firm is involved in a lawsuit. But you have raised a concern that's in the middle somewhere that we need to make sure we address so that you can continue current practice.
But there's a massive number of other places that use photographs for ID and on passes and on everywhere else.
So we have to make sure they don't fall.
Yeah, we have to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, schools, colleges, so.
Remember, in Illinois, when they passed their bill with the private right of action, nursing homes got sued, school districts got sued, people got sued who have databases of biometric data.
So we need to be careful, but
Yeah.
does this involve like cameras at the ski resort? Just getting random folks and making sure that they're
I believe there is a connection to social media in this as well, but I mean, typically the way it works is you've got your database, someone pass scans when they're going through the gates, pulls up their record, and then the person can look and say, all right, that person looks generally like the person in the picture. Sometimes it's hard because they've got goggles and everything else on. But so it's not an automated use of scanning, it's not an AI, which, who knows, but
Costco does it.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a fuzzy picture of you that you're trying to like generally know that it's the same person.
Right. We all do this too. I mean, it's here too.
Use
right,
Face ID,
and I would
yeah.
think folks would be giving their agreement to it when they sign up, when they buy the pass too. And they probably already do that. There's probably already a disclosure.
Again, the private right of action creates a heightened concern, like it did in Illinois, that you could be sued as an entity that has ID-based data.
So that we need to figure out. I mean,
And that's why we need the disclosure.
I think it
Just to be
all,
clear.
disclosure doesn't protect a business from a private right of action. So I think
Like
you're
it would
looking.
help.
Yeah, I think
Well, you would hope it would help, but our businesses with very strong data privacy provisions are saying that they are still worried that they could.
I don't doubt that. Yes.
What we're asking is just alignment with what other states passed at this point. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're asking for something out of the norm.
Yeah.
of What's happening in
Okay.
other places.
Great.
Okay, so that's a flag, and then this, some of these definitions and the biometric stuff is going to health and welfare next.
But we'll take care of this because it's a business concern. There's other hospitals that less biometric data. And they want a lot of, grace on that period, so, and they don't like the private right of action. So thank you, we are done.
Thank you.
We appreciate your patience. Thanks.
I appreciate you fitting me in.
Yeah, well, I hope it was